Mississippi single mom Olivia Walker thinks she finally has her life balanced out. Until she meets a man who's quick to write a check she's all too willing to cash.
He's very confident, very sure of himself.
And when she invests more than just her heart, her new man quickly goes for broke.
She wanted to make Kenyatta happy, but things just went completely wrong.
Olivia went out on a limb. Her children, everything. She jeopardized that. All for this man.
And later, halfway across the globe in Bali, Indonesia, Heather Mack has been handed the world on a platter.
She had the silver spoon in her mouth and received any and everything as an only child.
But Heather wants more than love and attention. She wants it all.
Heather would not stop till she got access to her mother's money.
And it's kind of like, I'm going to do it for my man. I'm going to make our life right for him.
Growing up in a stable home in the small town of Ridgeland, Mississippi, Olivia Walker's planned every step of her life.
Olivia's parents were very clear with her. The keys to success were good life, good job, good friends, good family, good man.
Olivia's parents were solidly middle-class people who worked really hard with regard to doing everything the right way. She really wanted to make her parents proud.
Following a series of odd jobs after high school, Olivia's on the road to happiness when at 21 she meets the man she's certain will make her dreams come true.
She got married. She had 3 children, and things seemed to be on the normal, average path.
Unfortunately, there are some bumps along the way. Olivia has married too young, and when things don't work out, the 30-year-old finds herself divorced and raising her beloved kids all alone.
The studies show that the younger they are, the more the relationships don't work out. But in another way, her parents had ingrained in her that marriage was part of that formula of success.
Olivia has yet to find her knight in shining armor, so instead, the former stay-at-home mom focuses on finding a career rather than true love. In no time, the young professional lands a job as a part-time teller at a credit union in her hometown.
She was dependable and dedicated at her job. Her bosses loved her. Her clients loved her. People knew her. She was one of the people in the neighborhood that you could count on.
Before long, Olivia's friendly, can-do attitude skyrockets her from part-time teller to full-time bookkeeper and on the fast track to management.
When Olivia got her new duties, that involved, number one, she had the combination or the access to the vault. She also balanced the books, and she would be in charge of ordering hundreds upon thousands of dollars when the bank needed cash.
Olivia had an incredible work ethic and in many ways took the straight path right to the top. She was extremely bright, and more than anything else, she was really trustworthy.
With so much on her plate, Olivia doesn't have much time for fun and games. But working at a bank affords her the opportunity to meet all kinds of people. And she's instantly smitten when 29-year-old Kenyatta McGee, a dapper young man 2 years her junior, comes in to cash a check.
He worked at a pharmacy. He's manly looking. He was broad of shoulder and square of chin. He was sexual chocolate. And there was definitely a connection between these two.
I'm writing my phone number down for you.
The pair strike up some chit-chat, and it turns out a fluttering heart isn't the only thing they share.
Yes, you will.
For one, they both had children. For two, they were both married and perhaps were not very happy in their marriages, especially with Kenyatta, who was involved in a divorce, and things were really sucking him dry, not just financially, but emotionally too.
After just a few weeks of getting to know each other, the two become an item.
For the first time in a long time, Olivia's life seemed to be in good balance. She worked her way up to a management position. She had this man in her life, and life was good for Olivia.
But as quickly as things heat up, they take a chilling turn when Olivia finds out Kenyatta's got much darker plans in mind for their future.
There was no length to which Olivia would not go to make sure that she kept her man.
Love will make you do crazy things.
An American Home Shield warranty can help protect appliances like your fridge, no matter how old.
This isn't about appliances.
It just covers systems, too, like your AC.
It's about home warranties.
Olivia Walker has finally found the man of her dreams in Kenyatta McGee.
Olivia and Kenyatta had a lot in common. He charmed his way right into her heart. She didn't know, though, that Kenyatta had a dark side.
Kenyatta had a criminal history. He had a criminal record. He had served time for a felony as well as some minor drug charges. Had Olivia known about Kenyatta's priors, she wouldn't have given him the time of day.
But love can be blind. And in just 3 months of dating, Olivia has only seen the innocent side of Kenyatta.
Olivia would have done almost anything to keep her man happy.
And when he shares with Olivia a secret about his bank account, her loyalty is put to the ultimate test.
Really broke right now. I'm down and out.
Kenyatta confides to Olivia that his upcoming divorce is just bleeding him dry. And he's really struggling financially because of it. Olivia is sympathetic, and she feels that this is something that she can really empathize with him about.
We can both start new lives.
But her wheels really start spinning when Kenyatta hints at the unthinkable, claiming a quick payday would give them a clean slate.
I got something to say.
Kenyatta then suggests that, well, perhaps Olivia should get money from the bank that Olivia works at.
That we can rob this bank, and nobody would know. He made it sound like this would be a victimless crime. Nobody would be injured. Got the plan.
Although they've only been dating a few months, dollar signs form in Olivia's big brown eyes. And even though she has more at stake than Kenyatta, love prevails as she signs off on his sordid scenario.
She had 3 children to consider. She had her reputation in the community to consider. Olivia's not interested in turning to a life of crime, but Olivia is interested in Kenyatta. And Kenyatta's got her on the hook.
It's not unusual for someone to commit a horrible crime, even though they don't have a criminal history or a criminal past, and they'll do it out of love.
On a steamy September afternoon, Olivia gives Kenyatta the code to the bank's back door, and he calls his cousin, who agrees to act as a getaway driver. With the arrangements made, they put their plan into place.
On this particular Tuesday, Olivia was scheduled to close with an employee that she herself had trained.
Around 6 o'clock, the women count their drawers and exchange friendly conversation. Meanwhile, Olivia slyly heads to the drive-through window to cue Kenyatta, who's hiding outside.
The signal for Kenyatta to come in was when Olivia opened the blinds. So once she opened the blinds, at that point, Kenyatta exited the vehicle and went and used the code and entered the bank.
The women make their way to the vault to balance the nightly books. That's when a masked Kenyatta sees his opportunity to strike as Olivia gets herself ready to take center stage.
Give me the code!
He surprised them and forced them to the ground. Olivia became hysterical and started screaming and screaming, and the robber at that point put duct tape over Olivia's mouth to keep her quiet. Stacy was definitely afraid for her life.
Kenyatta pulls some handcuffs from his toolbox and hog-ties Stacy. As they rehearsed earlier, he then turns his attention to Olivia.
Olivia is handcuffed in a similar fashion. However, he left one of her hands free so she can manipulate the vault doors.
With the women secured, he pulls out a can of spray paint and blinds each security camera with a coat of lacquer.
They planned this out to the most intricate details. You can almost say that they were obsessive compulsive in the way they just put every single thing together.
Give me the code right now!
After some aggressive play acting, Olivia gives up the digits to the vault. Once inside, Kenyatta marvels at the stacks of cash piled high above his head.
The denominations were 20s, 10s, 5s, and 100s. He had brought along with him in his box of tools large garbage bags, the kind that people would use to put leaves in if they were raking their yard. And he filled those bags with those bills.
He then hurries through the same door in which he entered, where his getaway driver has been waiting.
After Kenyatta left the bank, Olivia had to continue with the act. She had to continue screaming, she had to continue crying, she had to continue to look like a victim. She also knew she had to give Kenyatta enough time to get out of the city. So she took her time composing herself before she dialed 911.
Ma'am, calm down. I can't understand you like that.
Minutes later, police arrive on the scene and quickly untie the women, hoping to find out exactly what happened. They start by speaking with Stacy, who's got a surprising attitude given what just went down.
When Stacy was interviewed, of course she was scared, she was rattled, but she had a calm demeanor about her and was able to give a nice statement.
Olivia, on the other hand, is a basket case.
Even though this was a traumatic experience, I believe Olivia's reaction to it was a little bit exaggerated. It was just completely unnatural. At that point, we decided that it wouldn't be a good idea to try to talk to her that night, that we need to talk to her on a separate day.
Officers tell Olivia to go home and get some rest, but instead she immediately makes her way to Kenyatta's place, just outside the city limits, where her man is waiting anxiously with their haul.
What?
There was more money in these bags than either of them had ever seen and would ever see again. And that had to be an amazing rush for them both.
Given her effortless leap from everyday bank teller to bank robber, there's no limit to what Olivia might be capable of with Kenyatta by her side.
Kenyatta instilled this in her mind that if we do this, we'll live to be cliche, happily ever after.
After this heist, there was no telling what Olivia would be willing to do next.
And later, in Bali, Indonesia, Heather Mack will also learn that listening to a smooth talker with a forked tongue can ruin even the most idyllic lives.
She was bludgeoned to death. It was really a gory sight.
It's kind of like, I'm gonna do it for my man, you know, I'm gonna make our...
As the robbery scheme takes hold, it's clear Olivia only cared about Kenyatta and herself.
The one thing that makes this crime more diabolical is the fact that Stacy trusted Olivia. And Olivia knew what the plan was, yet she carried it out. She had no regard for Stacy's safety or anything.
Following a brazen $1.3 million bank heist in Richland, Mississippi, Olivia Walker and her boyfriend Kenyatta McGee think they're in the clear.
When Olivia and Kenyatta are counting all this money, they were probably on cloud nine.
Back at the crime scene, police have a feeling it's an inside job.
It's either an employee or a former employee has some involvement, especially when they have a code to enter the building.
And when detectives unearth some evidence that points to Olivia just a few hours after the robbery, it puts them hot on her trail.
As we were going through the evidence, analyzing the evidence, one thing stood out about the handcuffs that were used to secure Olivia and Stacy. The release was a lever as opposed to a keyhole, so we knew at that point that they weren't real, that they were some form of novelty handcuffs. We began to wonder, where could these be sold?
A quick online search leads detectives to a local party supply store, where they discover a stock of the same imitation handcuffs. As they comb through the shop's surveillance video, they find something that confirms their suspicions.
We observed a female that resembled Olivia. She was with 3 small children and an unidentified male wearing a white t-shirt and dark colored pants. Our next move was to confront her with the evidence.
Okay.
24 hours after the heist, Olivia arrives at the police station to give her statement.
We didn't play all of our hand at once. We eased her into it. Once she admitted that she did go shopping, we then hit her with the video.
It's strange that you end up with the handcuffs on you, and you purchase some handcuffs.
And at that point, Olivia began to break down a little bit. She began to cry. She began to become uncooperative.
She had played the role of innocent victim and had the crocodile tears. At the end of the line, she, in fact, was just as manipulative in committing this crime as Kenyatta was. She knew the jig was up.
Even though Olivia refuses to come clean, police have enough to formally charge her.
You want to place me under arrest?
Listen.
Why?
We have more than my proper cause to believe that you're involved in this particular robbery.
Oh wow. Oh, wow.
In the face of jail time, Olivia will only give up her accomplice's name, but no information on his whereabouts.
His name is Ken.
Ken what?
Ken McGee.
The former teller has no intention of leading police right to her man's doorstep. Her love runs too deep, and if she can't be happy, at least he might have a shot.
He asked her to do this thing, and she was going to see it through because he was her man, and she was going to stand by him and do her best so that he didn't have to suffer for the fact that the heist went wrong.
Olivia was protecting Kenyatta by not coming clean, saving herself, maybe doing less jail time. Again, as we see so many times, doing it in the name of love.
Fortunately, when police do some digging with Olivia's friends and family, they learn all they need to know about Kenyatta and his relationship with Olivia. And when they pull his old mugshot, it's game over.
We compared that mugshot to the image on the video and knew that we had a match.
After searching all the addresses linked to Kenyatta, they track him down just 6 days after the robbery. He's nabbed nearly 400 miles away in Gainesville, Georgia, at his ex-wife's house, the very wife he was complaining to Olivia about.
He had all the cash with him, except $100,000. There was no indication that his wife knew what was going on. The evidence seems to show that he showed up there with the bags and the money. In fact, she made him sleep on the couch. That's how they found him.
I found it very ironic that we would find Kenyatta in Georgia with his ex-wife because Kenyatta had promised Olivia that they were going to make a life together with the money that they had secured from the bank robbery. Olivia was going to be his princess, and he was going to be her prince.
Even though he refuses to come clean, Kenyatta is arrested and charged with robbery, conspiracy to commit robbery, and kidnapping. And when they go back to Olivia and mention where her so-called boyfriend was found, she flips.
It's true. I am telling the God. It's true. I didn't know what he was going to do. I promise I did not know.
This was the ultimate betrayal. She gave up her life, her children, for this guy who was nothing more than a double-crosser.
When Olivia heard where Kenyatta had been, there are canaries who wish they could have sang as prettily. That's when she decided that she was going to tell everything she knew and explain that Kenyatta was just as willing a participant in this whole heist. It wasn't all her after all. Her man had done her wrong.
With a mountain of evidence against him, Kenyatta pleads guilty to robbery, conspiracy, and kidnapping. He's sentenced to 50 years in prison, with the final 15 years suspended. Olivia also pleads guilty to robbery and conspiracy and is given 15 years behind bars. During her stint in prison, Olivia has shown remorse for her actions. And those who know her best realize this isn't the real Olivia.
Olivia probably learned the harshest lesson of love there is. Just because you love someone does not mean they'll love you.
It's clear that Olivia's involved with a man who is manipulating her. And Olivia, based on her criminal history, wouldn't have done this but for her man.
Get on the ground!
She wasn't remorseful the night that she watched Stacy get hogtied and shoved around. She wasn't remorseful at the time she came into the station and continued to lie to the detective.
I am telling the God. It's true. I didn't know what he was going to do. I promise I did not know what he was.
I think she's remorseful now, though.
Olivia Walker's dreams of making a quick buck with her man forced her down a dark path from which there's no return. Overseas, in Bali, Indonesia, Heather Mack also proves that love and greed make for a deadly combination. Born in the lap of luxury, Heather Mack has it all in the heart of Illinois.
Heather and her family were from Oak Park, which is a pretty prominent and sleepy suburb here outside of Chicago.
As a child, she always had a solid relationship with her mother, Sheila, but it's her daddy, James, who makes her heart sing.
Heather's father was a well-known jazz composer, and he had made a good bit of money just from his compositions and from his musical career.
She adored him. He was everything to her. Her entire life revolved around him.
He'd be at the piano, and he'd have his little girl right next to him seated on the piano, trying to show her what he was doing.
With enough wealth and connections to last a lifetime, Heather's future is full of possibilities. But it all comes to a screeching halt on an otherwise picture-perfect August Sunday when she's just 11.
James died while they were in Athens, Greece. He was walking through a hotel and suffered from a heart attack and just died instantly.
In just 5th grade, Heather isn't emotionally ready to handle life without the one person she loved most in this world.
With Heather being Daddy's girl, that was extremely traumatic for her.
When a young child loses a parent, first of all, they're alone, they're scared, it's hard for them to trust other people, and therefore their maturation becomes completely skewed.
Fortunately, he left behind a large estate for his family to get by.
When James Mack died, he left his daughter a great inheritance. She had a trust fund worth $1.5 million.
The money becomes rightfully Heather's when she turns 30 and will leave her set for life. But until then, moving on without James is harder than either she or her mother could have imagined.
Heather's relationship with her mother following the death of her father immediately started to unravel, started to deteriorate.
And the final straw comes when Mom decides to trash some of James's things, including his original sheet music.
She was so busy. I mean, the house was enormous, and it had tons of stuff, so she just said, I'm going to throw it away.
It kind of gave this image to Heather that, okay, he's not here anymore, just, get rid of him. It's disposable. Your father is disposable.
Oh, come on, throw it away.
This was the ultimate slap in the face, because not only was she tossing out his possessions, she was tossing out the most important memories that Heather had about her father, and this caused Heather to really act out.
There were conflicts about whether Heather was attending school, whether she was taking school seriously, and that Heather wasn't taking instructions from her mother.
But the real damage from James's untimely passing won't be felt for many years to come, when Heather puts a new man at the center of her world.
Heather was always trying to irritate Sheila. Always. Association with this guy raised the ante.
You need to have some more respect, young lady.
She's doing it for her man. It's all in the name of standing by your boyfriend.
In the wake of her father's death, Oak Park, Illinois youngster Heather Mack is forced to enter adulthood without her best friend and role model.
He was her everything. It was like her teddy bear and, her protector and the person that she could relate to.
As a single mom, Sheila does her best to keep Heather grounded. But as she approaches Sweet 16, the more Sheila tries to reel her daughter in, the more Heather lashes out.
She began in the beginning just to stay out a little bit later than she should have. Then she began taking the family car, leaving Sheila not knowing where her daughter was with the car.
From there, Heather's self-serving attitude only escalates. The sophomore decides to drop out of school and embrace her inner wild child.
Heather was looking for fun, looking to use drugs, looking to have sex. She was hanging around with a bad crowd.
And before long, Heather brings her nasty side home.
There was just a lot of chaos within that household. The police were called there 86 times in order to resolve disputes or take police reports because she was missing or deal with some type of conflict.
Sheila called me up at one point, and she was on the verge of tears and told me that my daughter's just going crazy. She's hitting me. She told me Heather broke her arm, pushed her down the stairs.
As Heather's relationship with Sheila declines, she searches for the one thing missing in her world, love. And she finds it at the center of her clique in unemployed 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer. The second she lays eyes on Mr. Tall and Handsome, her life changes forever.
And it seems like these hearts and Cupid are like flying all around, and it's like this kind of love at first sight. Tommy was physically in shape, really nice on the eyes, and kind of your stud.
Heather is so head over heels she doesn't care that Tommy's currently on probation for his dark past.
Tommy was convicted on an assault charge. And this wasn't some slap on the wrist. This was something that was followed through with court supervision.
To make matters worse, Sheila couldn't be less impressed by her daughter's taste in men.
What is he doing here?
Sheila had an instant dislike for Tommy. I think it was her instincts telling her that this guy was using Heather. If Heather didn't have the money she had,
Can you just show up?
Tommy would not have had any interest in her.
Seriously, we are going to talk about this later, young lady. You have not heard the end of it.
After just a few short months of dating, the new couple are madly in love. But the real trouble is born when Heather starts shopping for onesies.
Heather finds out that she's pregnant. And looking at it from Sheila's perspective, it's kind of like there's no getting rid of this situation. There's no outgrowing this. Once you have a baby with an individual, they're in your life forever.
When Heather's mother found out that Heather was pregnant, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and the tension at that point was just off the Richter scale.
During the first 2 months of her pregnancy, Heather's relationship with Sheila continues to suffer, and she and Tommy are attached at the hip. So Sheila makes a last-ditch effort at winning back her daughter's heart by scheduling a 10-day vacation to Bali, Indonesia.
She called me, she said, I'm really hoping that this is an opportunity for me and Heather to be alone, away from any influence of anybody, where we can have a heart-to-heart and have a good time in the process.
On a picturesque August morning, Sheila and Heather land in Bali and make their way to the swankiest hotel on the island.
It has a very luxurious lobby. The rooms are enormous. The facilities are extensive, beautiful swimming pools, exotic plants, a great concierge to take you on all kinds of excursions in Bali. It was paradise.
But it doesn't take long for the sweet getaway to turn sour.
They were in the hotel, and Sheila was in the room, getting up. Heather said she'll be right back, and she left and disappeared.
Heather, you here?
Fearing Heather ran off looking for trouble in a foreign land, Sheila searches the hotel grounds high and low. Just then, she spots her missing daughter, and she's not alone.
Sheila's walking in. Lo and behold, she sees Tommy.
There you are. You know, I have been looking for you for hours.
Sheila almost lost her mind when she saw Heather with her boyfriend Tommy. And at this point, she knew that there was some real trouble that she was going to have to deal with.
Your ticket? You've got to be kidding me.
Sheila doesn't hesitate to get right in Tommy's face, ordering him to explain himself.
He bought a ticket. I bet he bought a ticket.
She asked Tommy, what the hell are you doing here? Who paid for your airfare to get here? Who's paying for your hotel? Are you checked in here? Oh, yeah, I'm checked in.
He bought a ticket. I bet he bought a ticket.
Heather jumps in and swears Tommy paid his own way.
Money. Which is money.
But when Sheila calls her credit card company, the truth comes out.
$12,000?
The flight alone to get Tommy to Bali was $12,000, and Heather charged that to her mother's credit card without her mother knowing about it.
They had a knockdown, drag-out battle that unnerved the entire hotel staff.
Eventually, Heather convinces Sheila to return to their room, promising she'll send Tommy home on the next flight if they can talk it out in private.
Every single time we go out.
It calmed down a little except that Heather and Tommy are texting back and forth and discussing ways that they could possibly hurt Sheila.
And the following morning, Sheila finds out that Tommy didn't fly all this way simply to enjoy the fun and sun. He's here to support the love of his life, and she's standing in their way.
She was a threat. She was a problem in the entire equation.
Heather and Tommy thought it was just going to be a very easy solution for their issues to just go ahead and kill Heather's mother. But as we see with young people, they didn't really think this through.
Heather and Tommy came up with a plan really quickly, and it wasn't fully thought out, but it was going to get her completely out of the picture. And so they decided to use whatever they could, and Tommy grabs this fruit bowl out of his room and heads over to Sheila's room.
In Bali, Indonesia, Heather Mack and her boyfriend Tommy Schaefer set a plan in motion to take Heather's mom, Sheila, out of the picture once and for all.
Heather says, I'm going to do it for my man. I'm going to make our life right for him.
While Sheila takes in the ocean air from the veranda, Heather carefully opens the door as Tommy slinks inside, where he lies in wait.
Tommy is in the bathroom, and Sheila is still on the balcony. Heather and Tommy are texting back and forth on their phones about what they're going to do.
As Sheila comes in off the balcony, Heather sends the fatal order.
Heather sends the text now, and he comes out with this metal bowl and hits her over the head.
Tommy bludgeons Sheila with a fruit vase, a big fruit vase that he used to strike her head.
Sheila tries to defend herself, but she's no match for the much larger man.
Tommy continues to smash and smash and smash her stomach.
There's blood everywhere. It was just horrible.
A pregnant Heather watches with an icy stare as Tommy finishes the job.
This shows that Heather did not care about her mother. That anger and frustration that she carried all the way from 11 years old still remained and got mixed up and morphed and turned into something very cynical and twisted.
The frenzied attack is over in a matter of seconds. All that remains is Sheila's lifeless body.
Her bloodied mother's body, whose skull was bashed in, whose fingers were broken. It was too horrible for viewing.
They were cold and calculated in their actions. And for Heather, certainly she had built up such resentment, anger, and hate towards her mother that it was easy to act by instinct.
Eager to cover their heinous crime, Heather and Tommy weigh their options and decide to stuff Sheila inside one of their large, hard-shell suitcases.
The body was too big, so Tommy had to press down on the top of the suitcase, almost like a stack of t-shirts, in order to press her body and zip her body up into this suitcase.
What was really sickening about it, it was the indignity of being not only being murdered, but being stuffed into a suitcase as if you were dirty laundry. I mean, it was awful.
Now that Sheila is gone, Heather and Tommy are free to be together forever. With the unholy package ready for delivery, they call the front desk and prepare to check out.
They bring it out to the front entrance and hail a taxi cab. Tell the cab driver to open up the trunk. They lift the suitcase into the trunk and close the trunk. They tell the cab driver, we'll be right back.
Instead, they slip into a different cab, headed for another part of town.
The two go to another hotel just a few miles away that they had checked into using their real names and using Sheila's credit card.
Nearly 2 hours pass as the taxi driver waits patiently for the couple to return, but they never come back.
When they don't return, he talks to the hotel officials. They decide to unload the suitcases. That's when they start seeing blood leaking from one of the suitcases.
Without hesitation, the hotel manager notifies authorities, who rush to the scene. And as they carefully unzip the luggage, they're disturbed to see Sheila's remains spill out on the driveway.
Even if you're a veteran police officer, it's still pretty shocking to see this bashed-in body, this blood everywhere. It was just horrible.
I think that hotel staff found out pretty quickly who the victim was, that it was Sheila, and checked the victim's room. And at the time, Heather and Tommy were pretty much nowhere to be found.
By all outward appearances, the murderous lovebirds think they pulled off the perfect crime.
Their plan was to leave Bali the minute they could.
Will police nab the couple before they disappear for good?
And it's kind of like this young Bonnie and Clyde.
They didn't care about what happened because now they could fuck
with sleeping pills.
Sheila fell asleep, but she survived the overdose and didn't have a thought about it afterwards. Either Heather didn't give her enough, or they didn't impact on Sheila the way Heather thought they would.
Heather Mack and her boyfriend Tommy are on the run and hiding out in a local hotel as investigators discover Sheila Mack's mangled body.
Heather and Tommy must have had some sort of nervousness knowing the gravity of what they did. They probably self-medicated by just concentrating on their love.
Across town, police are putting the sordid puzzle pieces together.
Everybody knew who they were. It's just a matter of where did they go. Are they still here?
I have been looking for you for hours!
They had saw Tommy, Heather, and Sheila arguing.
I bet he bought a ticket.
In addition, Heather and Tommy had hailed a cab that picked up the body.
News of the death of an American in Indonesia spreads across international and local media like wildfire. And just 24 hours after the news hits, police get the break they've been hoping for at the hotel where Heather and Tommy are holed up.
Owner of the hotel discovers that the two people who just checked in are the two people the police are looking for. He calls the authorities and tells them, I think your two people that you're looking for are in my hotel.
They were very immature, and they were deluding themselves into thinking that all of this was being done for love, when in fact it was being done for convenience.
Authorities head to the hotel, and the manager lets them into the room where the fugitives are hiding out.
Get up! And the police barge into the room and see Tommy and Heather in each other's arms. And they're both arrested under suspicion of murder.
The pair is immediately booked into separate prisons in Indonesia until further evidence emerges. Just days later, police get all the proof they need when they discover the text exchange between Heather and Tommy spells out premeditated murder.
They used smiley faces, they used emojis back and forth. So it was as if they were having a regular conversation and not plotting the demise of another human being. In one text message, Heather reveals that she can't wait for her mother to die.
Heather and Tommy both plead not guilty. A judge suspends their trials for 2 months until Heather has her baby. That spring, Heather gives birth to a baby girl who she names Stella.
And Stella has become a point of controversy because Indonesian law allows for the mother of an incarcerated individual to raise her baby for 2 years in her cell.
The child, after the 2 years, has to be placed in the care of a family member if they're able to take on the care for the child. If not, the child ends up in the foster care system.
U.S. authorities have no jurisdiction over Balinese law, so the pair stands trial separately in Bali, 9 months after Sheila's murder. Tommy is found guilty of first-degree murder, and Heather of assisting in first-degree murder. Showing mercy, a judge sentences Tommy to only 18 years in jail and gives Heather just 10.
The prosecutor recommended a relatively lenient sentence for Tommy because he's been polite. And Heather got a very light sentence because they viewed her as having been remorseful, which is completely contrary to the facts.
Heather's life started in this beautiful, peaceful suburb where she was raised under pretty high middle-class standards. Now her life has ended in a prison in Bali.
Despite her skillful acting job in court,
the rhythmic, metallic clanking of an old industrial printing press is often the only sound that cuts through the midnight freeze of Detroit's outer avenues, a relentless thud that mimics the heavy, anxious heartbeat of a city running out of time. It is November 2026, and a biting wind is screaming off the Detroit River, carrying with it a sheet of ice that glazes the cracked concrete pavements and the rusted skeletal remainders of abandoned automotive foundries. But inside the neon-lit, sterile confines of the Michigan State Police Forensic Science Division, the atmosphere is dangerously hot, charged with a sudden, near-atomic energy that hasn't been felt in these corridors for nearly half a century. A lone fingerprint analyst, staring at a high-definition monitor, watches as an automated software sequence completes a microscopic scan, comparing millions of pixelated ridge characteristics against an ancient, yellowed evidence card pulled from a vault that smells of decayed paper and forgotten despair. For 47 years, a shadow walked these streets, an invisible phantom who left behind a trail of shattered glass, pools of drying blood, and a community paralyzed by an unremitting, generational terror. Everyone thought the monster was long dead, buried in an unmarked plot or dissolved into the expanding wasteland of the Rust Belt, a ghost that time had successfully managed to sweep under the rug of historical statistics. They never imagined that the killer was still breathing the same heavy winter air, living a quiet, unremarkable life in a neatly painted brick bungalow less than 3 miles from the original bloodstain, holding a secret that was about to be ripped open by a single, terrifyingly perfect technological alignment. To grasp the bone-chilling weight of this sudden forensic alignment, you have to push past the modern ruins of the metropolis and plunge directly into the dark, smoky, high-velocity landscape of October 1979, an era when the city was a boiling cauldron of economic anxiety, flashing disco lights, and a soaring crime rate that kept every household in a state of permanent lockdown. The air back then was thick with the scent of leaded gasoline, cheap tobacco, and the underlying, metallic tang of industrial grease from the massive assembly lines that ran 24 hours a day. It was a place where survival meant keeping your eyes down, your doors deadbolt, and your suspicion sharp. Then, on the rain-slicked night of October 12th, the fragile illusion of suburban safety within the working-class neighborhood of Dearborn was violently systematically pulverized. A young woman, a 21-year-old receptionist named Linda Novak, who spent her days typing shipping manifests and her nights studying accounting at a local community college, vanished from her basement apartment without a single sound echoing up to the floor above. She wasn't a risk-taker. She was a creature of absolute routine, a girl who kept a precise diary of her expenses and never missed a Sunday dinner with her aging parents. When her boyfriend arrived the next morning to pick her up for a weekend trip, he found the front door slightly ajar, a chilling draft blowing through the hallway, and a freshly brewed pot of coffee sitting on the kitchen counter, its low burner still sizzling, scorching the glass pot into a dark, permanent stain of domestic interruption. The immediate investigation that exploded across the precinct was an exercise in pure, unadulterated panic and chaotic scramble that exposed a city completely unequipped to handle a predator of this clinical calculation. Within an hour of the first emergency call, the narrow alleyway behind Linda's apartment building was choked with the flashing red strobes of police cruisers, their reflections dancing like fresh blood across the puddles of dirty water. The detective assigned to lead the initial hunt was a hard-bitten, chain-smoking homicide veteran named Frank Kowalski, a man who had seen hundreds of bodies in his career, but had never encountered a scene that felt this deliberately sterile, this hauntingly empty. The apartment had been scrubbed of immediate violence. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, no overturned furniture, no frantic handprints smeared across the wallpaper. But when Kowalski stepped into the small, cramped bathroom, his flashlight beam caught a terrifying anomaly that made his throat go completely dry. The frosted glass window facing the secluded backyard had been meticulously removed from its track, its rubber seals sliced clean with the precision of a surgical scalpel. Sitting on the porcelain rim of the sink, Glinting under the harsh flashlight was a single, discarded piece of heavy-duty black electrical tape, torn off with a jagged edge that suggested the killer had used his own teeth to sever the strip. The discovery of that electrical tape triggered a frantic, hyper-focused search of the immediate neighborhood, but the investigation was instantly paralyzed by the limitations of late 70s forensic science and a total absence of actionable leads. Detectives went door to door in the driving rain, hammering on the wood frames of neighboring houses, interviewing exhausted factory workers who had just finished the graveyard shift, but no one had seen a thing. The storm had washed away any potential footprints in the muddy alleyway, and the primitive fingerprint dusting techniques of the era yielded only a chaotic smear of partial ridges on the bathroom window frame, prints that were deemed completely unclassifiable by the department's old-school identification bureau. The local newspapers seized upon the story, plastering Linda's high school graduation photo across the front pages beneath screaming, sensational headlines that sent a shockwave of paranoia through every apartment complex in the Tri-County area. Women began carrying whistles, hardware stores sold out of window locks within 48 hours, and an eerie, suffocating silence descended over the streets of Dearborn as night fell, a collective realization that a ghost was hunting among them, an entity that could enter a locked home through a sliced window sill and vanish into the midnight fog without leaving a name. The nightmare reached its grim, devastating crescendo 3 weeks later when a crew of municipal utility workers descended into a deep, subterranean concrete valve chamber near the intersection of the Southfield Freeway and Michigan Avenue. It was a dark, damp vault, filled with the roar of rushing drainage water and the smell of industrial runoff. When the foreman shined his lantern into the deep recess of the chamber, he didn't find a broken pipe. He found Linda. The body had been hidden with a chilling, professional calculation, wrapped tightly in a heavy industrial canvas tarp that had been secured with multiple bands of the same heavy-duty black electrical tape found on her bathroom sink. The medical examiner's subsequent report was a document of pure horror. The cause of death was a systematic, slow ligature strangulation executed with a thin nylon cord, a method that left no defensive wounds on her fingers, indicating she had been completely bound or paralyzed by terror before the final, fatal pressure was applied. There was no foreign hair, no fibers, no biological material that the primitive testing of 1979 could exploit. The killer was someone who understood the baseline rules of police work, someone who knew how to clean a crime scene, someone who operated with the cold, detached pulse of a machine. As the months bled into years, the case file grew thick with dead ends, false tips, and the hollow promises of a department buckling under the weight of an escalating urban crisis. Detective Frank Kowalski spent his nights in the basement archive, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and carbon paper, staring at the photographs of the canvas tarp and the jagged strips of electrical tape, his mind spinning in a permanent loop of frustration. He interviewed local drifters, known sex offenders, and disgruntled factory workers, but every lead evaporated into thin air, leaving him with nothing but a drawer full of redacted statements and a mounting sense of personal failure. The Novak family slowly disintegrated under the weight of the unanswered question, the father dying of a sudden heart attack within 2 years of the murder, the mother retreating into a silent, drug-induced seclusion, leaving Linda's bedroom exactly as it was on the night she vanished, a dusty shrine to a life violently erased from the ledger of the living. By the time the decade turned, the 1979 case was officially stamped with the cold, bureaucratic red ink of a permanent stalemate, relegated to the high shelves of the unresolved archives where old murders went to die. Decades passed, and the city underwent a massive, agonizing transformation, its population shrinking, its infrastructure crumbling, while the technology of the future quietly evolved inside the climate-controlled labs of a new generation of investigators. The old paper fingerprint cards, once filed by hand in massive steel cabinets, were systematically scanned, digitized, and fed into the advanced algorithms of the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, a digital network capable of analyzing thousands of microscopic ridge characteristics per second. In the winter of 2026, a specialized cold case unit, operating under a federal grant designed to clear the backlog of unsolved civil rights-era homicides, pulled the Dearborn file from its resting place. They weren't expecting a miracle. They simply wanted to run the old bathroom window lifts and the adhesive backing of the preserved electrical tape through the newly upgraded high-definition software matrices that could isolate individual skin cell patterns and latent prints hidden beneath the adhesive layers of old tape. The breakthrough did not happen with a dramatic siren or a televised press conference. It happened in the dead of night with a soft, electronic chime from a computer terminal inside the forensic lab. The newly updated software had successfully penetrated the adhesive residue on the inner surface of the black electrical tape found at the 1979 crime scene, isolating a single, pristine latent thumbprint that had been trapped in the glue for 47 years. The algorithm didn't just find a match. It found an absolute, undeniable identity, a sequence of 22 distinct ridge characteristics that slammed into a modern state database with the force of a physical explosion. The print did not belong to a transient, a career criminal, or a dead man. It belonged to a 74-year-old retired assembly line inspector named Raymond Vance, a man who had worked at the Ford River Rouge plant for 35 years, a man who had lived a quiet, blameless existence in the same county since the night Linda Novak was taken. The realization that the killer was still alive, still walking among them, triggered a massive, highly classified operational response from the state and federal authorities, who understood that an old predator is often the most dangerous kind when cornered. For 72 hours, undercover surveillance teams tracked Raymond Vance's every movement, watching as the frail, white-haired grandfather drove his clean sedan to the local grocery store, helped his neighbors clear their snowy driveways, and played cards at a local senior center. To the world, he was the definition of suburban stability, a kindly elder statesman of the old blue-collar Detroit. But the behavioral analysts watching him saw something else, a man who still locked his doors with a meticulous, obsessive rhythm, a man who scanned his mirrors every time he turned a corner, a man who had carried a monstrous secret through every single day of his adult life without ever letting the mask slip. Which brings us directly to the chilling, cinematic execution of the Midnight Raid, a tactical operation designed to shatter 47 years of absolute security in a single, explosive heartbeat. The snow is falling in heavy, silent flakes, burying the quiet residential avenue in a thick blanket of white as a convoy of black, unmarked tactical units creeps down the street without headlights. The heavily armed state troopers, wearing night vision optics and body armor, move across the icy lawn with the silent precision of ghosts, their weapons raised, their breath forming faint plumes of mist in the freezing air. With a single, deafening crash from a hydraulic breaching ram, the heavy oak front door of the bungalow is blown off its hinges, the interior instantly illuminated by the blinding, chaotic strobe of weapon-mounted lights and the deafening command of federal agents breaching the perimeter. Raymond Vance is pinned to his hallway floor before he can even clear the sleep from his eyes, his thin wrists forced behind his back as the heavy steel cuffs click shut, ending a flight from justice that had lasted nearly half a century. As the sun begins to rise over the frozen landscape of Detroit, casting a pale, weak light across the yellow police tape that now seals off the killer's home, the news of the arrest hits the morning broadcasts like a physical blow to the heart of the community. The shockwaves are total, a profound existential rupture for a city that had spent decades trying to forget the terror of the late 70s, forcing neighbors to confront the horrifying reality that the gentle old man next door was the monster who had paralyzed their parents' generation. The legal battle ahead promises to be a complex, historic confrontation between the limits of human memory and the absolute, digital certainty of modern science, a trial that will drag the dark secrets of 1979 back into the harsh glare of the public eye. But for the ghost of Linda Novak, and for the few remaining survivors of a generation defined by that terror, the long, freezing night of absolute betak is finally over, the silence of the grave replaced at last by the heavy, unyielding strike of a judicial gavel. The echo of the breaching ram still vibrates through the frozen suburban air as Raymond Vance is hoisted from the floor, his frail frame trembling not from the freezing wind blowing through his shattered doorway, but from the sudden, cataclysmic realization that his 47-year lie has finally collapsed. In the back of the unmarked tactical SUV, The flashing red and blue lights of the backup cruisers paint his wrinkled face in a sickening, rhythmic pulse. He does not speak. He does not ask why heavily armed state troopers just dragged him out of his bed in his pajamas. He simply stares at his own liver-spotted hands, now bound tightly by cold steel handcuffs, hands that once possessed the raw, youthful strength to extinguish a life in a dark basement apartment in the winter of 1979. For nearly 5 decades, Vance operated under the comforting delusion that he had beaten the system, that the city's escalating chaos had successfully swallowed his crime, and that the only evidence linking him to Linda Novak was a fading memory locked inside his own deteriorating mind. But as the convoy accelerates toward the Michigan State Police high-security detention facility, the reality of modern forensic science settles into his chest like a block of ice, proving that the past is never truly buried. It is merely waiting for the technology of the future to dig it up. Inside the processing wing of the headquarters, the environment is a stark, clinical contrast to the gritty, smoke-filled precincts Vance remembered from his youth. The walls are a blinding, sterile white, illuminated by hum of high-intensity fluorescent lights that leave no room for shadows. He is stripped of his civilian clothes, his old flannel shirt and slippers replaced by a stiff, oversized bright orange jumpsuit that marks him as a high-profile state inmate. 2 veteran detectives from the Special Cold Case Unit step into the interrogation room, carrying a single, thick cardboard box that bears the original case number from 1979. They don't begin with a barrage of shouted accusations. They understand that with a man like Vance, psychological dominance is achieved through the quiet, systematic presentation of unyielding facts. They sit across from him at the metal table, the hum of the overhead recording cameras the only sound breaking the suffocating silence of the room. The lead detective, a sharp-eyed investigator named Miller, slides a vintage photograph across the polished steel surface. It is a high-resolution print of Linda Novak, captured just months before her disappearance, her dark hair styled in the voluminous waves of the late 70s, a bright, optimistic smile lighting up her youthful face. Vance's eyes reflexively dart down to the image, his pupils contracting slightly, an involuntary physical reaction that is instantly captured by the high-definition lenses mounted in the corners of the ceiling. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the kindly, retired auto worker slips, revealing a glimpse of the calculating, cold-blooded individual who had stood in the shadows of a Dearborn alleyway 47 years ago, watching his target through a frosted glass window. "Do you know who this is, Raymond?" Detective Miller asks, his voice low, steady, and entirely devoid of emotion, the tone of a judge delivering an inevitability rather than a question. Vance clears his throat, his voice a raspy, dry whisper that sounds like dead leaves scraping across concrete. "I see the newspapers. I know what this is about. But you've got the wrong man. I'm a grandfather. I worked 35 years at the Rouge plant. I've never been arrested in my life. I don't know that girl, and I don't know anything about a murder from 40 years ago." The defense is practiced, delivered with a flat, rehearsed monotony that suggests he had envisioned this exact conversation 1,000 times during his sleepless nights, preparing a wall of suburban respectability to shield himself from the sins of his youth. But the detectives do not blink. Instead of arguing against his denial, Miller opens the cardboard box and pulls out a large, transparent evidence envelope containing a pristine, digital magnification of a fingerprint. The image is massive, displaying the intricate, labyrinthine patterns of human skin ridges, overlaid with a series of bright green digital markers that isolate specific bifurcations, dots, and enclosures. Next to it, Miller places a second chart, a copy of Raymond Vance's modern fingerprint profile, taken during his routine background check for a concealed weapons permit in the early 2000s. This print on the left, Miller says, pointing to the green markers, was extracted from the adhesive backing of a strip of heavy-duty black electrical tape found at the crime scene in October 1979. For 47 years, Raymond, your skin cells were trapped in that glue, sealed away from the air, preserved perfectly like a fly in amber. In 1979, our systems could only look at 20% of a partial print. Today, our automated digital matrices map over 200 separate ridge characteristics simultaneously. The software doesn't make mistakes, Raymond. It performed a point-by-point architectural match against your profile. The probability of this print belonging to anyone else on this planet is 1 in 80 billion. You were in that bathroom, Raymond. You tore that tape with your teeth, and you left your signature behind. The silence that follows the detective's words is heavy, absolute, and suffocating. Vance's jaw tightens, the skin around his mouth turning a pale, sickly gray as the clinical certainty of the science begins to systematically demolish his wall of denial. He looks away from the chart, his eyes fixing on the stark white wall, refusing to engage with the visual proof of his undoing. He realizes that his entire life, his decades of hard work, his reputation as a quiet neighbor, his peaceful retirement, has just been rendered completely irrelevant by a microscopic pattern of oil and sweat that he had carelessly left behind on a piece of adhesive tape when he was 27 years old. While the high-stakes psychological warfare intensifies inside the interrogation room, the city outside is waking up to an absolute media firestorm that is ripping through the local communities like a tornado. The morning news broadcasts lead with a shocking announcement of the arrest, the anchors' voices laced with a mixture of disbelief and urgency as they read the details of the breakthrough. Detroit 1979 cold case solved. Fingerprint match ends decades of terror. In the neighborhood of Dearborn, where the murder had occurred, residents stand on their porches in the freezing morning air, watching as a fleet of unmarked police vehicles and forensic vans surround Vance's brick bungalow, sealing the entire property behind a perimeter of bright yellow crime scene tape. The older generation of residents, those who had lived through the terrifying autumn of 1979, are plunged into a sudden, vivid state of retrospective trauma. They remember the paralyzing fear that had gripped the city after Linda's body was discovered wrapped in that industrial canvas tarp, the way parents refused to let their children walk to school alone, the frantic installation of deadbolts and security bars on every window. For 47 years, they had lived under the assumption that the killer was a transient monster who had long since vanished into the vast, decaying landscape of the Rust Belt. Now, they're forced to confront the grotesque reality that the Phantom was living among them the entire time, a regular fixture at the local hardware store, a man who smiled and waved at them while carrying the memory of an execution in his heart. At the Michigan State Police headquarters, the original investigative files are being systematically digitalized, revealing a dark, historical tapestry of a department that had been completely overwhelmed by the urban chaos of the late 70s. The 1979 logs describe a city on the brink of structural collapse, with homicide detectives carrying caseloads that defied human capacity, forcing them to abandon critical leads in favor of immediate, active emergencies. Frank Kowalski, the original lead detective who had spent his life haunted by Linda's murder, had passed away in a veterans hospital 5 years prior, his private journals filled with sketches of the electrical tape and notes about an investigation that had broken his spirit. Current investigators review his old notes with a sense of profound reverence, recognizing that the modern breakthrough is built on the foundation of Kowalski's meticulous preservation of the physical evidence, a preservation that kept the killer's fingerprint safe until the technology of 2026 could finally unlock it. Inside the interrogation room, Detective Miller leans forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper that pierces through Vance's stoic silence. "We didn't just stop at the fingerprint, Raymond. Once the system gave us your name, we unspooled your entire life history from 1979. We looked at your employment records at the River Rouge plant. We looked at your vehicle registrations. Do you know what we found, Raymond? We found that in October 1979, you were assigned to the maintenance division of the foundry. You had direct, unrestricted access to the heavy-duty industrial canvas tarps used to cover the assembly machinery during weekend shutdowns. The exact type of canvas tarp that Linda Novak was wrapped in when they pulled her out of that subterranean valve chamber." Vance's breathing becomes shallow, his chest rising and falling in rapid, jerky movements as the circumstantial evidence begins to interlock with the forensic science, forming an inescapable cage around him. He grips the edge of the metal table, his knuckles turning white, his mind frantically searching for a loophole, a defense, a lie that can survive the onslaught of data. But there is none. He is an old man, stripped of his armor, facing a new world that records everything, forgets nothing, and possesses the capability to reach back through the fog of time to demand a full accounting for the blood spilled in the dark. The psychological weight of the revelation is an absolute cataclysm, an existential rupture that shatters the town's trust in its own history, proving that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones who hide in the woods, but the ones who blend perfectly into the mundane landscape of everyday life. As the detectives pack up their charts and prepare to transfer Vance to the federal holding cells for his initial arraignment, the city of Detroit faces a long, painful confrontation with its past, knowing that the ghost of 1979 has finally been dragged into the light, and that the long-delayed march toward absolute justice has officially begun. The transition from the sterile interrogation room to the Wayne County Circuit Court in downtown Detroit is a chaotic plunge into the blinding glare of a modern media circus. It is 9 a.m. on a freezing November morning, and the majestic stone facade of the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice is surrounded by a sea of broadcast vans, their telescopic satellite dishes pointed at the heavy gray clouds. A thick phalanx of county sheriffs and state troopers stands shoulder to shoulder behind metal barricades, holding back a surging crowd of local residents, legal analysts, and true crime reporters who have gathered to witness the official unmasking of a ghost. When the armored transport vehicle pulls into the secured underground garage, the mechanical steel gate slams shut with an echoing boom, a sound that marks the definitive end of Raymond Vance's free life. He is led up the rear elevator in heavy ankle shackles, the rhythmic, metallic clinking of the iron chains a stark contrast to the quiet, mundane footsteps he had taken through his suburban neighborhood just 24 hours earlier. Inside room 402, the atmosphere is suffocatingly tense, the air thick with the scent of wet wool, damp umbrellas, and a collective, anxious anticipation. Every single wooden bench in the public gallery is packed to capacity, leaving no standing room. In the very front row, sitting with rigid posture, are the remaining extended family members of Linda Novak. Her younger cousin, Sarah, who was just a toddler when Linda vanished, sits holding a vintage, fading Polaroid photograph of Linda laughing at a backyard barbecue, a heartbreaking visual anchor to a life that was violently stolen before it could truly begin. When the side door opens and Raymond Vance is led into the well of the courtroom, a collective gasp ripples through the crowd like a wave of electricity. Seeing him in the stark, oversized orange inmate jumpsuit, without his signature winter jacket or his familiar walking cane, strips away the last remnants of his grandfatherly persona. He looks shockingly frail, an old man whose silver hair is uncombed and whose eyes are fixed firmly on the defense table, completely refusing to look at the gallery or the battery of cameras tracking his every micro-movement. The circuit court judge takes the bench, the sharp, authoritative strike of his wooden gavel cutting through the low murmur of the room like a gunshot. The proceeding is a high-velocity legal exercise designed to formally establish the state's intent to prosecute a crime that has been frozen in time for 47 years. The Wayne County prosecutor, an aggressive, sharp-eyed assistant district attorney named Marcus Sterling, stands at the podium and begins reading the criminal complaint into the record. The words hit the silent room with a sickening, visceral force. The state of Michigan officially charges Raymond Vance with 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder, kidnapping, and felony murder in connection with the October 1979 disappearance and slaying of Linda Novak. As Sterling reads through the newly uncovered forensic details, the point-by-point digital match of the fingerprint trapped beneath the adhesive layer of the black electrical tape, the precise tracking of the industrial canvas tarp back to the River Rouge maintenance foundry, the sheer calculation of the crime becomes undeniable. Vance's defense attorney, a prominent, high-priced public defender named Eleanor Vance Wells, no relation to the defendant, attempts to mount an immediate challenge to the state's aggressive posture. She stands at her table, her voice booming through the courtroom's sound system as she argues for a reasonable bond, citing her client's advanced age, his pristine criminal record spanning nearly 5 decades, and his deep, unchanging roots in the local community. Mr. Vance is a 74-year-old retired assembly line inspector, she states, her hand gesturing toward the quiet, shaking figure sitting next to her. He has lived in Wayne County his entire life, paid his taxes, raised a family, and has never once been accused of a violent act. To hold an elderly man without bond based entirely on a single piece of 47-year-old physical evidence that has sat in a dusty locker for decades is an egregious overreach of judicial authority. But the prosecutor fires back instantly, his voice dripping with a cold, unyielding certitude that leaves no room for compromise. The state is not prosecuting the old man sitting at that table today, Your Honor, Sterling declares, pointing a steady finger across the aisle. We are prosecuting the 27-year-old predator who used his knowledge of industrial machinery to trap a young woman inside her own apartment, execute her with a nylon cord, and hide her body inside a subterranean valve chamber like a piece of industrial waste. The evidence against this defendant is not a circumstantial theory. It is a permanent, digital molecular signature trapped in the adhesive glue of the very tape he used to bind his victim. He has successfully evaded the scales of justice for 47 years, living a life that Linda Novak was ruthlessly denied. He represents a supreme flight risk and an absolute danger to the integrity of this historic process. The state requests that he be remanded into custody without bail. The judge does not hesitate. He reviews the confidential forensic reports submitted by the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, his face an unreadable mask of solemn gravity. With a sharp, final strike of his gavel, bond is officially denied. Raymond Vance is remanded to the high-security wing of the Wayne County Jail, ordered to be held in administrative segregation until his formal preliminary examination. As the sheriff stepped forward to lead him out of the courtroom, Vance's eyes briefly sweep past the front row of the gallery, his cold, vacant gaze colliding for a fraction of a second with the tear-streaked face of Linda's cousin. There is no remorse in his expression, no silent plea for forgiveness. There is only the flat, calculating detachment of an old operator who has finally run out of paths to run down. While the legal battle lines are drawn in downtown Detroit, a massive secondary crisis is unfolding within the archives of the local municipal departments and the historical records of the auto plants where Vance spent his youth. The realization that an active, high-level homicide suspect managed to hide in plain sight for 47 years while working inside the heart of the city's automotive infrastructure has triggered an unprecedented, independent audit overseen by the Michigan Attorney General's office. A specialized team of modern forensic accountants and cold case investigators has locked down the old personnel records storage facilities at the River Rouge complex, systematically digitizing thousands of old microfiche files, daily shift logs, and maintenance reports from the late 70s. The burning question hanging over the entire state legal establishment is a terrifying one. Was Linda Novak an isolated victim, or was Raymond Vance a prolific, shadow predator who used the industrial sprawl of the Rust Belt as his personal hunting ground? Investigators begin mapping Vance's employment history against a grim, historical database of unsolved disappearances and cold case homicides that occurred across southeast Michigan between 1975 and 1985. They discover a pattern of chilling anomalies. During 3 separate periods when the River Rouge plant underwent extensive retooling shutdowns, times when Vance was assigned to skeleton maintenance crews with unsupervised access to the vast, underground tunnel networks of the industrial complexes, 3 other young women vanished from working-class neighborhoods within a 10-mile radius of the foundries. None of those cases were ever solved, their files sitting in the same dusty archives where Linda's case had languished for decades. The physical reality of the city itself begins to take on a hostile, menacing tone for its residents. The old, crumbling brick bungalows and the vast, abandoned industrial sectors that define the landscape of outer Detroit are no longer viewed merely as symbols of economic decline. They are now recognized as the protective camouflage that allowed a killer to survive across generations. The neighborhood where Vance lived out his peaceful retirement is paralyzed by a collective sense of profound betrayal. Neighbors who had shared lawn mowers with him, who had invited him to backyard summer barbecues, and whose children had played on his front porch are forced to look back at their own history through a distorted, sickening lens. Every kind gesture he made, every smile he offered across the fence, is now stained by the realization that he was carrying the memory of an execution inside his chest every single day. Back in his concrete cell at the county jail, Raymond Vance is experiencing the brutal reality of an institution that does not care about his age or his suburban respectability. He is placed on a strict 23-hour lockdown schedule, isolated from the general inmate population for his own protection, as a 74-year-old cold case killer would be an immediate target for violence in any prison block. The space is tiny, a 6-by-9-foot box of reinforced concrete, a stainless steel toilet, and a narrow bunk that offers no comfort to his aching joints. The continuous hum of the industrial ventilation system and the distant, mechanical clanging of heavy steel tier doors are the only sounds that penetrate his isolation. According to internal jail logs, Vance has entered a state of profound psychological retreat. He sits on the edge of his bunk for hours, his head bowed, his hands clasped between his knees, staring intently at the concrete floor as if he can see the ridges of his own fingerprint tracing their way across the stone. He refuses the standard jail meals, consuming only small amounts of water, his physical frame shrinking noticeably with each passing hour as the reality of his confinement begins to crush his spirit. Yet, whenever his defense team arrives in the secure attorney consultation room, the frailty instantly vanishes, replaced by a sharp, demanding precision as he reviews the copies of the digital forensic files, searching desperately for a single administrative flaw, a single broken chain of custody, a single legal technicality that can blow the state's case wide open before the trial can even begin. The concrete walls of the Wayne County Jail high-security wing hum with a low, oppressive vibration, a continuous reminder of the invisible machinery of justice holding Raymond Vance in an unbreakable grip. It is the middle of November, and through the narrow, reinforced glass slit at the top of his cell wall, the sky over Detroit is a permanent sheet of leaden gray. Inside this cell, there are no references to the quiet, suburban life Vance spent 47 years constructing. There are no manicured lawns, no television screens broadcasting afternoon baseball games, and no family photographs resting on wooden mantels. There is only the harsh, shadowless glare of an unyielding fluorescent bulb that stays illuminated 24 hours a day, reflecting off the stainless steel surface of the sink and the cold, gray stone beneath his feet. For a man who spent his entire adult life operating under the assumption that he had outsmarted the world, this sudden, total reduction of space is a psychological crucible. Vance sits on the edge of his narrow mattress, his back pressed against the freezing concrete wall, his long, wrinkled fingers tracing the seams of his bright orange jumpsuit. For nearly half a century, his mind had been his sanctuary, a fortress where the memories of October 1979 were locked away behind a firewall of mundane routines and blue-collar respectability. He had convinced himself that the city's historic decline had effectively erased his past, that the physical transformation of Detroit, the demolition of old neighborhoods, the fires that consumed precinct houses, the loss of paper records, had rendered him completely invisible to the law. But as he listens to the mechanical footsteps of the correctional officers pacing the tier outside his door, he realizes that the modern world does not require paper. It operates on data, on pixels, and on the terrifyingly permanent mathematics of molecular geometry. On the small steel table bolted to the floor of his cell lies a massive binder containing the state's preliminary discovery material, a document that his defense team had dropped off during their last high-security visit. Vance turns the pages with a slow, deliberate precision, his eyes scanning the dense columns of forensic data, laboratory certifications, and digital mapping diagrams. He reads the text not as an old man facing the terrifying prospect of dying in a state penitentiary, but as a technical inspector analyzing a blueprint for a manufacturing defect. For 35 years, his job at the River Rouge foundry was to find the microscopic cracks in heavy machinery before the engines left the line. Now, he is searching for a crack in the state's forensic architecture, a single administrative error, a broken link in the chain of evidence custody, or a software calibration anomaly that could allow his lawyers to suppress the fingerprint that has sealed his fate. The core of the prosecution's case, as detailed in the binder, relies on the absolute precision of the newly updated Next Generation Identification System, or NGI. In 1979, the latent print lifted from the adhesive backing of the black electrical tape was classified as a partial smear, an incomplete sequence of skin ridges that possessed fewer than 8 identifiable characteristics, far below the legal threshold required for a definitive courtroom match in the pre-digital era. The print had been filed away in a cardboard box, an analog relic that was deemed useless by generations of homicide detectives. But the data didn't decay. In the summer of 2026, the Michigan State Police Crime Lab utilized a revolutionary digital imaging process known as laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy to penetrate the microscopic layers of degraded adhesive residue that had covered the print for 47 years. The software didn't just clean the image. It mapped the subsurface matrix of the skin ridges, isolating over 200 separate minutiae points, bifurcations, ridge endings, and sweat pore distributions that were completely invisible to the human eye under a standard microscope. Vance's jaw tightens as he stares at the digital magnification of his own thumbprint projected onto a printed chart. The green indicators highlighting the matching points look like a constellation of stars, a permanent, inescapable map of his identity that he had left behind in that dark basement apartment when he was 27 years old. He remembers that night with a clarity that the passage of decades had never been able to dull, no matter how hard he tried to drown it in the routine of his daily life. He remembers the sound of the rain pounding against the pavement of the alleyway, the smell of leaded gasoline and damp earth, and the sudden, sharp snap of the black electrical tape as he tore it with his teeth in the dark bathroom. He had been so careful to wipe down the window frame, to clear away his footprints, and to handle the industrial canvas tarp with heavy leather work gloves. He had thought of everything. But he had never imagined that the sticky, invisible glue on the inner surface of a standard roll of utility tape would act as a time capsule, holding on to his biological signature across 2 generations of human history, waiting for the world to invent the technology required to read it. While Vance sits in the absolute silence of his high-security cell, the world outside the jail is moving with a ferocious, unstoppable momentum. In the offices of the Wayne County Prosecutor, a specialized task force of state attorneys, digital forensic engineers, and behavioral analysts is preparing for the upcoming preliminary examination, a critical judicial proceeding where the state must present its core evidence before a district court judge to prove that sufficient probable cause exists to bind Vance over for a full criminal trial. The prosecutors understand that they are not just trying an old murder case. They're setting a historic legal precedent for the entire state of Michigan. They are testing whether the digital footprints of the past can withstand the aggressive constitutional challenges of a modern defense team armed with high-priced independent consultants. The lead prosecutor, Marcus Sterling, has spent the last 72 hours inside a secured war room at the police headquarters, surrounded by large whiteboard timelines and digital projection screens. He has quietly assembled an elite lineup of expert witnesses from across the country, molecular chemists from the federal labs, structural engineers who specialize in the vintage architectural blueprints of Detroit's utility networks, and retired police clerks who can verify the historical logging protocols of the late 70s. Sterling knows that the defense will launch a massive, multi-pronged assault on the integrity of the evidence locker where the 1979 files were stored. They will argue that over the course of 47 years, during city budget crises, precinct closures, and department reorganizations, the physical evidence was subjected to environmental degradation, improper handling, and potential cross-contamination by other officers who moved through the archive facilities. To counter this strategy, Sterling's team has tracked down the retired evidence custodian who managed the property room at the Dearborn precinct between 1978 and 1985, 82-year-old former officer named Arthur Vance, no relation, ironically, who lives in a northern Michigan retirement village. Arthur's personal logs, which he had kept out of an old-school, bureaucratic obsession with detail, reveal that the Linda Novak evidence box had been sealed in a specialized, wax-coated cardboard container and transferred directly to a climate-controlled state repository in Lansing during the department consolidation of 1982. The seal numbers matched the modern tracking codes down to the digit, proving that the killer's fingerprint had remained entirely undisturbed, insulated from the external chaos of the city's structural decline, held in a state of permanent forensic suspension until the labs of 2026 were ready to open it. Meanwhile, the defense team, led by Eleanor Vance Wells, is preparing a massive, preemptive omnibus motion to suppress the government's primary evidence. Operating from a sleek legal office in downtown Detroit, her team of researchers is combing through the legislative history of digital data collection in Michigan, preparing a complex constitutional argument aimed at the validity of the automated fingerprint identification system itself. They intend to argue that the state's retrofitted scanning of ancient, unclassified print cards constitutes an unlawful retroactive search under the Fourth Amendment, invading the privacy of citizens who had never consented to their data being subjected to modern, algorithmic surveillance tools that did not exist when their records were originally generated. Furthermore, the defense is preparing a savage assault on the credibility of the historical industrial records connecting Vance to the River Rouge Foundry canvas tarps. They file a series of motions demanding the state produce the original physical inventory sheets from October 1979, knowing that many of those documents were lost or destroyed during the auto plant restructuring of the late 80s. They want to frame the prosecution's timeline as a brilliant piece of digital fiction, an elaborate circumstantial tapestry that relies on speculative algorithms and missing records to scapegoat a frail, 74-year-old grandfather to clear a high-profile cold case from the department's ledger. As the date of the preliminary examination draws closer, the city of Detroit faces a profound, lingering confrontation with its own historical ghost. The media coverage has reached a saturation point, with national true crime networks broadcasting nightly specials that reconstruct the autumn of 1979, juxtaposing the vintage newsreels of a burning, bleeding metropolis with the modern, high-definition footage of the midnight raid on Vance's bungalow. The collective psyche of the community is caught in a state of suspended animation, a dark, cinematic realization that the passage of time is no longer a guaranteed shield for the guilty, and that the shadows of the past can be dragged back into the light at any moment, forcing an entire generation to answer for the terror they spent a lifetime trying to forget. The cold wind rattling the reinforced window slit of cell 14B offers no comfort to the man sitting in the dark. It is late November, and the high-velocity legal machinery of Wayne County is moving toward its first major public collision. Inside his 6-by-9-foot concrete vault, Raymond Vance remains frozen in a posture of absolute, defiant silence. He has spent the last 48 hours studying the state's forensic dossiers under the unblinking eye of the overhead security camera, his mind analyzing the data loops with the mechanical precision of a retired industrial quality inspector. He understands that the state has built a chronological cage around his identity, using the modern sorcery of next-generation digital imaging to turn a 30-year-old partial smear into a definitive courtroom execution. But Vance also knows that in a court of law, data is only as strong as the human chain that carried it across the decades, and he is counting on his high-priced defense team to find the single administrative fracture that can tear the government's case to pieces. Outside the jail, the morning of the preliminary examination arrives with the bleak, gray solemnity of a Detroit winter. The streets surrounding the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice are blocked off by concrete security barriers and a phalanx of county sheriffs, their heavy boots crunching against the frozen slush on the pavement. The plaza is an absolute jungle of media equipment. Massive broadcast vans with telescoping satellite arrays, bundles of heavy black power cables snaking through the snow, and teams of field reporters shivering in their heavy parkas as they deliver live, breathless updates to the national feeds. The public gallery inside room 602 is packed to its absolute physical limits hours before the judge takes the bench, the air thick with a collective, anxious anticipation that makes every breath feel heavy. When Raymond Vance is led through the side door by two armed deputies, a heavy, suffocating silence falls over the courtroom. He is wearing his dark gray civilian suit, a calculated wardrobe choice designed by his defense team to strip away the visual taint of the orange inmate uniform and re-establish his persona as a respectable, elderly suburban grandfather. He carries a small manila folder containing his personal notes, his spine straight, his face an unreadable mask of stoic detachment as he navigates the gauntlet of flashing cameras and whispered curses from the gallery. He does not look at the front row, where the Novak family sits shoulder to shoulder, their eyes burning into a silhouette with a fury that has been building for 47 years. The proceeding is called to order by District Judge Evelyn Thornton, a veteran jurist known for her unyielding adherence to procedural precision and her intolerance for courtroom theatrics. The preliminary examination is not a full trial. It is a high-stakes evidentiary gateway where the prosecution must present sufficient core evidence to satisfy the court that a crime was committed and that probable cause links the defendant directly to the violence. If Marcus Sterling can clear this judicial hurdle, Vance will be officially bound over to the circuit court for a full criminal prosecution. If he fails, the case that took 47 years to solve will evaporate in a heartbeat. Sterling takes the podium for the state, his posture commanding, his voice carrying a cold, resonant authority that immediately sets the tone for the hearing. He does not begin with a dramatic speech. He begins with a timeline. He utilizes a massive, high-definition digital projection screen that fills the wall behind the witness stand, displaying a synchronized, minute-by-minute mapping of October 12, 1979. Your Honor, Sterling begins, his eyes fixed on the court clerk. The government is prepared to demonstrate that the disappearance of Linda Novak was not a mystery solved by coincidence, but an execution tracked by science. We will show that the defendant utilized his position within the automotive infrastructure of the city to target, abduct, and conceal his victim, leaving behind a forensic signature that has survived the decay of time and the collapse of the Metropolitan Archives. The prosecution calls its first witness, Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief forensic pathologist and molecular chemist who oversaw the re-examination of the 1979 evidence locker. Thorne takes the stand with the calm, academic certitude of a scholar who deals in absolute mathematical probabilities. Under direct examination, he details the physical condition of the wax-sealed cardboard container that had held the primary crime scene artifacts since the department consolidation of 1982. He explains how his team utilized laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy to isolate the latent thumbprint trapped beneath the degraded adhesive layers of the black electrical tape found on Linda's bathroom sink. The integrity of the sample was extraordinary, Dr. Thorne testifies, using a digital pointer to highlight a massive magnification of the print ridges on the screen. Because the tape had been folded over itself during the initial collection, the inner adhesive layer was effectively vacuum-sealed, protecting the biological skin cell matrix from oxidation and environmental moisture for 47 years. When we introduced the high-intensity laser sequencing, we were able to map over 200 separate minutiae points. This is not a circumstantial similarity, Your Honor. This is a point-by-point molecular match that connects the skin of Raymond Vance directly to the instrument used to bind the crime scene. Vance's lead defense attorney, Eleanor Vance Wells, stands at her table, her voice cutting through the clinical atmosphere of the room with a sharp, combative edge. She launches an immediate, aggressive cross-examination of the geneticist, targeting the vulnerability that has defined cold case litigations for generations. The potential for contamination during the decades when the evidence sat in analog storage facilities. Dr. Thorne. Vance Wells begins, stepping into the well of the courtroom. You testified about the wax seal on that container being extraordinary. But let's look at the official property room logs from the Dearborn precinct between 1979 and 1982. Isn't it true that during the summer floods of 1981, the basement property vault of that station suffered extensive water damage? Isn't it true that dozens of evidence boxes were moved by uncertified temporary personnel to a secondary facility without individual chain of custody signatures for each item? Dr. Thorne remains unshakable, his expression calm behind his glasses. The historical logs do indicate a facility transfer due to weather anomalies, counselor. However, the inner preservation pouch containing the electrical tape remained completely intact, its specialized cryptographic heat seal unbroken until it was opened in our secure laboratory in 22/6. The ambient moisture in the basement could not penetrate the polymer lining of the secondary containment bag. The print we recovered was completely insulated from external environmental factors. Vance Wells shifts her attack, focusing on the software algorithms used by the automated fingerprint identification system. Let's talk about the software itself, Doctor. The next-generation identification platform utilizes predictive algorithms to reconstruct degraded ridge patterns, does it not? It essentially uses mathematical probability to fill in the blanks where the original physical print was smeared or incomplete. You are asking this court to bind a 74-year-old grandfather over for murder based on a computer's guess of what a fingerprint looked like 47 years ago. The NGI system does not guess, counselor, Dr. Thorne responds firmly. It calculates architectural certainties based on established biological structures. The level of concordance required to trigger a match of this magnitude rules out false positives down to a statistical frequency of 1 in 80 billion. It is a mathematical impossibility for this print to belong to any other individual walking the earth today. The afternoon session transitions from the microscience of the crime lab to the historical geography of the industrial Rust Belt. Marcus Sterling calls to the stand Special Agent Marcus Vance, no relation to the defendant, a digital mapping specialist with the FBI's Operational Technology Division. Agent Vance projects a massive, three-dimensional digital model of the Detroit utility network from 1979 onto the screen, showing the intricate maze of underground concrete valve chambers and drainage tunnels that ran beneath the Southfield Freeway and Michigan Avenue. The courtroom lights are dimmed, and the screen glows with a vibrant, digital recreation of the night Linda vanished. The analyst demonstrates how the industrial canvas tarp that encased Linda's body was tracked directly back to the maintenance division of the River Rouge foundry where Raymond Vance was employed as an inspector in October 1979. He displays vintage inventory sheets that show a deficit of 6 heavy-duty canvas wraps from the specific maintenance locker Vance had accessed during the weekend shutdown of October 12th. The physical geography of the disposal site is critical, Agent Vance explains, his laser pointer tracking a red line through the virtual tunnels. The subterranean valve chamber, where Linda Novak's body was concealed, was a restricted municipal facility, accessible only through heavy steel manhole covers that required specialized industrial hooks to lift. It sat directly along the path of the main cooling lines that connected the Ford foundry to the regional drainage grid. Raymond Vance's employment logs show that he had spent 3 months prior to October 1979 mapping those exact cooling lines for the foundry's facilities committee. He didn't just happen to find that hidden vault, Your Honor. He knew it existed because he had helped document its structural layout for his employers. The visual evidence is overwhelming. A digital ghost of 1979 brought to life in high-definition brilliance, tracking a murderer's preparation and escape route with an accuracy that leaves the gallery breathless. The data analyst juror from the regular pool sits with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face white with the clarity of the presentation. Raymond Vance sits next to his defense team, his fingers tightly gripping the edge of his manila folder, a subtle, microscopic tremor visible in his jaw as the clinical grid of the prosecution's case continues to tighten around his history. As the daylight fades outside the high windows of the Hall of Justice, casting long, dark shadows across the wood paneling of room 602, the defense stands to deliver their closing counterargument for the preliminary examination. Eleanor Vance Wells leans heavily on the legal thresholds of probable cause, arguing that the government has presented a brilliant piece of historical fiction, an elaborate circumstantial tapestry that fails to meet the heavy burden of proof required to disrupt a citizen's life after 47 years of blameless existence. She demands that the charges be dismissed immediately, allowing her client to return to his home and his retirement. Judge Thornton looks down from the bench, her expression unreadable as she reviews her notes, the silence in the courtroom so absolute that the scratching of her pen sounds like gunshots echoing against the stone walls. The fate of Detroit's most notorious cold case hangs on a judicial determination that will either validate 47 years of agonizing investigative pursuit or allow a suspected shadow predator to walk out into the freezing winter night as a free man. The scratching of Judge Thornton's pen finally ceases, a sudden and total silence dropping over room 602 like a heavy curtain. For Eleanor Larson and the surviving cousins of the Novak family, the seconds that follow are an agonizing continuation of the 47-year vacuum that has hollowed out their family history. The judge slowly closes her leather-bound notebook, removes her reading glasses, and looks down from the elevated mahogany bench. Her gaze passes coldly over the defense team, pausing for a fraction of a second on the unreadable, weathered face of Raymond Vance before settling directly on the prosecution table. When she speaks, her voice carries the weight of absolute judicial finality, cutting through the thick, anxious air of the packed courtroom. The court has reviewed the evidence presented during this preliminary examination, Judge Thornton states, her tone devoid of any theatricality, carrying only the hard reality of the law. The defense has mounted an aggressive challenge to the data tracking systems and the historical integrity of the evidence containment. However, the forensic reality established by the Michigan State Police Crime Lab is unyielding. The presence of the defendant's thumbprint on the inner adhesive surface of an item used to secure the crime scene cannot be dismissed as a product of environmental coincidence or historical decay. Furthermore, the circumstantial alignment of the defendant's employment records and his specialized physical access to the restricted municipal infrastructure provides an ironclad baseline of probable cause. This is not a speculative theory, it is a clinical demonstration. The state has met its burden. Raymond Vance will stand trial for the first-degree murder of Linda Novak. This court is bound over. The sharp, decisive strike of her wooden gavel triggers an immediate, chaotic explosion of motion within the courtroom. A dozen news reporters spring from their benches, their shoes clattering against the hardwood floor as they race toward the rear exit doors, desperate to be the first to broadcast the live updates to the television anchors waiting on the freezing plaza outside. Linda's cousin, Sarah, collapses backward onto the wooden bench, her hands covering her face as she lets out a ragged, trembling sob that she seems to have been holding since the midnight raid. Across the central aisle, Eleanor Vance Wells immediately turns her back to the gallery, leaning over her table to whisper urgently to her client, her hands frantically sorting through a stack of legal briefs as she maps out the immediate appellate counterstrategy. But Raymond Vance himself barely offers a physical reaction to the ruling that has just guaranteed he will spend the rest of his natural life behind steel bars. He merely nods once, a slow, mechanical gesture of his head, his eyes remaining fixed on the empty surface of the defense table. The mask of the kindly, frail suburban grandfather remains perfectly intact, but beneath the table, out of sight of the cameras, his knuckles are white, his long fingers gripping the fabric of his suit trousers with a force that betrays the internal terror tearing through his chest. As two armed county sheriffs step forward, their hands resting on their duty belts as they command him to stand, Vance smoothly rises, adjusts the lapels of his gray jacket, and turns toward the holding cell door without once looking back at the community he had so ruthlessly deceived. The judicial confirmation that the 1979 cold case will proceed to a full criminal trial changes the entire operational tempo of the investigation, transforming it from a localized forensic breakthrough into a massive, statewide institutional reckoning. The Special Cold Case Unit, operating out of a secured, high-density operations room at the Detroit FBI field office, does not spend a single moment celebrating the victory. They understand that a preliminary hearing requires only a baseline showing of probable cause. A full criminal prosecution before a 12-person jury demands an airtight, absolute certainty that can survive a relentless scorched earth defense campaign. They also know that Vance Wells will now deploy a team of private investigators to dissect the personal lives of the state's forensic analysts, searching for any administrative loophole or historical discrepancy that can trigger a mistrial. To neutralize this threat, a specialized squad of federal financial forensic accountants is brought into the task force to unspool every financial transaction Raymond Vance executed over the last 5 decades. They begin digging through thousands of microfilmed bank records, property deeds, and ancient tax filings from the late 70s and early 80s. The investigators are operating on a dark, chilling hypothesis. A predator who possessed the clinical calculation to execute a flawless abduction, evade a massive metropolitan dragnet, and clean a crime scene so thoroughly in 1979 did not simply switch off his dark impulses after a single offense. They suspect that his quiet, unremarkable life as a low-level factory inspector was merely a cover for a much larger, darker itinerary of violence. As the financial data begins to populate the analyst's digital mapping screens, a series of strange, glaring anomalies emerges. Starting in the spring of 1980, just 6 months after Linda Novak's murder. Despite earning a standard assembly line wage at the River Rouge foundry, Vance had opened a series of private, out-of-state safety deposit boxes in Toledo, Ohio, using a string of falsified identification cards that bore variations of his mother's maiden name. The travelogues compiled by cross-referencing his old Union vacation records reveal that Vance made over 40 unlogged weekend road trips to various industrial towns across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois between 1980 and 1992, always traveling during long holiday weekends when the auto plants were completely locked down for seasonal retooling. The implication of these long-forgotten road trips sends a wave of profound, bone-chilling dread through the federal task force. They realized that Vance wasn't just hiding a single, historic murder. He may have been leveraging his position within the automotive logistics network to operate as a nomadic, high-velocity shadow predator, utilizing the sprawling highway systems of the Midwest to move between manufacturing hubs, hunting in the dark before returning to his pristine, brick bungalow in Wayne County. The cold case is no longer just a localized search for justice for Linda Novak. It has expanded into an active, multi-jurisdictional dragnet that threatens to unearth a decades-long trail of missing women across 4 states. Meanwhile, back in the suburban neighborhood of Dearborn, the atmospheric weight of the upcoming trial is completely suffocating for the local residents. The small, working-class avenue where Vance lived out his retirement has been transformed into a permanent, high-definition theater for true crime tourism. Independent documentary crews, true crime podcasters, and curious onlookers from across the state drive slowly past his property, their camera lenses pointed at the empty porch where an old man used to sit and wave at passing children. The local residents deeply resent the invasive, sensationalist spotlight, yet they are trapped in their own internal struggle to process the profound psychological trauma of the revelation. At the local community college where Linda had been an accounting student in the winter of 1979, a temporary memorial of white candles and vintage photographs is erected near the entrance of the historical library. The images of Linda, wearing a high-collared blouse, her hair styled in the distinct fashion of the late 70s, stare out at a new generation of students who were born decades after her death, a haunting reminder of a future that was violently stolen by a man who lived just a few miles down the road. The older faculty members and neighborhood elders walk past the memorial with their heads down, unable to shake the sickening realization that they had shared grocery store aisles, gas pumps, and church pews with a monster for nearly half a century. The structural fracture within the modern police department deepens with each passing day as the state attorney general's office continues its exhaustive audit of the 1979 homicide logs. The independent investigators uncover a pattern of systemic administrative neglect that had crippled the original precinct during the economic collapse of the late 70s. Files reveal that critical witness statements regarding a dark sedan idling near Linda's apartment building on the night of the abduction were completely lost during a chaotic shift transfer, buried beneath a mountain of unrelated emergency reports. Current detectives are forced to look back at their own institutional history with a sense of profound shame, realizing that the killer's survival was not just a product of his own clinical cleverness, but a direct result of a broken system that allowed an execution to slip through the cracks of a bleeding city. Inside the high-security administrative segregation wing of the Wayne County Jail, the absolute isolation is beginning to exert a slow, corrosive toll on Raymond Vance's psychological armor, even if his facial mask remains unyielding during his legal consultations. The human mind, no matter how cold or calculating, is not designed to survive the continuous, unblinking surveillance of a concrete vault. Without the comforting distractions of his suburban routine, without his lawn to mow, his television to watch, or his neighbors to deceive, Vance is left entirely alone with the physical evidence of his own undoing. The specialized jail logs reveal that he has completely stopped pacing his cell during the daylight hours, choosing instead to sit frozen on the edge of his bunk, his eyes fixed on the small steel table where the discovery binder rests. But during the deep, silent hours of the graveyard shift, the exact hours between midnight and 4 a.m., when the rest of the facility is plunged into a fitful sleep, Vance undergoes a terrifying transformation. The guards monitoring the closed-circuit screens report that he begins to trace the concrete seams of his cell wall with his fingernails, his lips moving in a silent, rapid mutter, his voice a low, raspy hiss that cuts through the midnight silence, like a snake moving through dry grass. He appears to be repeating names, dates, and highway numbers, his mind trapped in a permanent, maddening loop of the long-forgotten roads he traveled when he was a young man with blood on his hands. As November bleeds into the freezing depths of December, Eleanor Vance Wells launches her first major post-hearing legal counteroffensive, filing a comprehensive motion for a change of venue with the circuit court. She presents the judge with an exhaustive, 500-page portfolio of media analytics, newspaper headlines, and television transcripts, arguing that the saturated, sensationalist coverage of the midnight raid and the preliminary examination has completely poisoned the local jury pool. She claims that the term cold case monster has been so deeply embedded into the public consciousness of Southeast Michigan that finding 12 objective citizens within Wayne County is a statistical impossibility. She demands that the entire trial be moved to a rural county in the Upper Peninsula, hundreds of miles away from the metropolitan center where the emotional resonance of the crime is most potent. The prosecution team fights the motion with a ferocious, uncompromising determination, filing a detailed counterbrief that includes a comprehensive demographic survey of the region. Marcus Sterling argues that the horror of Vance's betrayal is not a localized phenomenon that can be evaded by changing counties. It is a historic, national narrative that has gripped the entire state of Michigan. Moving the trial, he argues, would do nothing to mitigate the publicity, while placing an unconstitutional, crushing logistical burden on the elderly witnesses and the surviving family members who have waited 47 years to see justice delivered in the same community where the blood was spilled. As the legal arguments play out in a series of tense, written briefs, the Cold Case Task Force uncovers a critical, long-lost witness who could provide the final, devastating link between Vance's identity and the night of the abduction. Through a painstaking, digital reconstruction of old municipal employment rosters from October 1979, analysts identify a retired night shift security guard named Walter Briggs, who had been assigned to the main gate of the River Rouge maintenance foundry on the night Linda Novak vanished. Briggs, now 81 years old and living in a remote logging town in northern Wisconsin, had never been interviewed by the original 1979 detectives due to an administrative oversight that omitted the gate logs from the primary homicide file. When two federal agents arrive at Briggs's cabin, they find an old man whose memory of his factory days remains razor-sharp. When shown a vintage photograph of Raymond Vance from 1979, Briggs doesn't hesitate. He immediately points a shaking finger at the image, his voice trembling as he recounts a specific, highly unusual interaction that occurred at 2:15 a.m. on October 13, 1979, just hours after Linda Novak disappeared from her basement apartment. Briggs remembers Vance driving his personal vehicle up to the foundry's loading dock during a mandatory plant lockdown, utilizing his specialized maintenance pass to bypass the standard security protocols. He told me he had forgotten his personal toolbox inside the foundry basement. Briggs tells the agents, his eyes wide with a sudden, historical weight of the memory. It was pouring rain, and he looked completely disheveled, his clothes soaked through, his face covered in scratches that looked like they came from bushes. Or a struggle. I told him he shouldn't be on the property during a shutdown, but he gave me a hard look, told me to mind my own business, and drove straight back toward the maintenance lockers where the heavy-duty industrial canvas tarps were stored. When he came back out 20 minutes later, his trunk was riding low, heavy, like he was carrying a massive weight. I didn't check the trunk because I knew Raymond, he was a quiet guy, an inspector. I never thought, God help me, I never thought he was carrying a body. This explosive, long-delayed statement provides the prosecution with an invaluable piece of direct human testimony to complement the absolute certainty of the molecular science. It bridges the gap between the microscopic thumbprint trapped in the electrical tape and the abstract geography of the subterranean valve chamber, placing Vance's scratching face behind the wheel of a vehicle at the exact foundry dock where the instrument of concealment was stolen. The final piece of the puzzle fits into place with an unsettling, terrifying perfection, tightening the legal noose around the former auto worker's neck and stripping his defense team of their remaining alternative theories. The story of the Detroit cold case, once a frozen, forgotten monument to an unsolved urban tragedy, has transformed into a raging, high-velocity torrent that threatens to pull down names, reputations, and historical assumptions across the entire landscape of the state's legal and industrial establishment. It stands as a stark, cinematic testament to the idea that time is an illusion when confronted by the unyielding march of forensic evolution, and that the modern world possesses the capability to reach deep into the dark of the past to demand a full, violent accounting for the secrets buried in the concrete. As the winter snow begins to bury the streets of Detroit in a thick, silent blanket of white, both sides prepare for the commencement of the full criminal trial, a historic, cinematic confrontation where a grandfather's mask will be permanently ripped away and where a city's 47-year night of absolute terror will finally face its definitive, thunderous conclusion. The motion for a change of venue is argued on a bitterly cold Tuesday morning in mid-December as a blinding lake-effect snowstorm barrels across southeast Michigan, blanketing the city of Detroit in a thick, suffocating layer of white. Inside room 602 of the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, the steam radiators hiss and groan against the freezing draft, creating a low, anxious undertone that fills the crowded chamber. The defense table is an absolute mountain of documentation, stacked high with binders containing thousands of printouts of digital news articles, television broadcast transcripts, and social media analytics. Eleanor Vance Wells stands before the circuit judge, her movements sharp, her voice echoing through the courtroom's audio system with a calculated, theatrical outrage. She paces the length of the bar, gesturing wildly to the packed gallery as she mounts a fierce, direct assault on the cultural memory of the metropolitan area. Your Honor, we are not looking at routine journalistic coverage here. We are looking at a state-sponsored media execution, Vance Wells declares, her eyes wide as she turns to face the bench. The term 1979 cold case monster has been blasted across every television screen, every radio frequency, and every digital news feed in southeast Michigan for the past month. The prosecution has carefully constructed a cinematic myth, the image of an industrial phantom hiding in the heart of our automotive infrastructure, and they have saturated the public consciousness of Wayne County to such a degree that the presumption of innocence has been entirely incinerated. If we attempt to impanel a jury in this building, we will be forcing 12 individuals to sit in judgment of a narrative they have already consumed, processed, and condemned. We are demanding that this trial be moved to a jurisdiction where the name Linda Novak does not evoke an immediate, emotional visceral trauma away from the geographical center of this historic frenzy. But the Assistant District Attorney, Marcus Sterling, remains completely unswerved by her performance. When he steps to the podium for the state, he does not offer emotional rhetoric. He places a heavy, bound statistical report on the wooden stand. He utilizes a comprehensive, scientific juror questionnaire study conducted by an independent demographic firm over the last 3 weeks, analyzing the baseline awareness of over 500 registered voters within the county. The defense is confusing high public awareness with systemic prejudice, Your Honor, Sterling responds, his voice low, steady, and dripping with a cold, professional certitude. Our data demonstrates that while 84% of the surveyed population is aware that an arrest was made in connection with a 1979 homicide, fewer than 12% possess any detailed knowledge of the specific forensic mechanics involved, namely, the subsurface laser mapping of the latent fingerprint trapped in the electrical tape. The citizens of Wayne County are fully capable of separating the sensational headlines of the evening news from the clinical, scientific truth that will be presented in this courtroom. The defense doesn't want an impartial jury, Your Honor. They want a disconnected jury. They want to drag this process to a remote corner of the state where the history of our industrial landscape is unfamiliar and where the institutional violation of a working-class neighborhood doesn't feel like a scar on the very ground beneath their feet. The people of this community have an unconstitutional, absolute right to sit in judgment of a crime that tore their own social fabric apart 47 years ago. The circuit judge takes less than 48 hours to deliver his written decision. The defense's motion for a change of venue is officially denied. The The trial will remain in downtown Detroit, but the court orders an expanded juror pool of over 600 citizens to ensure an exhaustive, multi-layered selection process that will strip away any individuals who have been pathologically compromised by the media coverage. It is a major, definitive tactical victory for the state, keeping the legal battlefield anchored in the precise geographical region where the emotional stakes are highest and where the investigative resources of the Cold Case Task Force are fully concentrated. With the venue secured, the specialized federal and state task force shifts its operational focus to Walter Briggs, the retired factory security guard whose long-forgotten memory of the rainy night of October 13, 1979, has become the crown jewel of the government's behavioral timeline. In a highly secured, soundproofed room at the Detroit FBI field office, prosecutors, behavioral analysts, and digital mapping specialists sit around a massive mahogany table, analyzing the high-resolution digital scans of the original River Rouge gate logs that Briggs had verified. The ink on the old log sheets is slightly faded, a pale blue ballpoint script on cheap, lined industrial paper, but the notation at the 2:15 a.m. marker is razor-sharp. Unit 14. R. Vance. Emergency Toolbox Recovery Clearance Granted. It is a devastating piece of contemporaneous evidence, written decades before anyone knew the specific composition of the industrial canvas tarp that wrapped Linda Novak's body, long before the forensic science existed to track subsurface skin ridges. It is the unvarnished, routine observation of a gatekeeper preserved in a dusty administrative archive, waiting 47 years for its moment in history. The behavioral analysts use this log entry to construct a chilling psychological profile of the defendant's movements. They demonstrate that Vance operated with the cold, situational intelligence of a professional quality inspector, utilizing the chaos of a mandatory plant retooling shutdown to mask his entry into the foundry basement, where he could secure the materials required to convert a violent abduction into a permanent, hidden burial. However, the defense team instantly recognizes the immense danger Walter Briggs poses to their structural strategy. Within 48 hours of the judge's venue ruling, private investigators retained by Vance Wells's firm begin descending upon the remote logging town in northern Wisconsin where Briggs has lived out his retirement. They cross-reference his old medical files, interview his neighbors at the local senior center, and dig into his personal history, searching desperately for any sign of cognitive decline, age-related memory confabulation, or personal bias that can be weaponized during the trial. They unearthed that Briggs had been treated for early-stage vascular dementia in the spring of 2022, a medical detail that the defense immediately translates into a series of aggressive pretrial filings. They argue that an 81-year-old man with a documented neurodegenerative condition cannot reliably testify about a fleeting, 5-second interaction that occurred through a rain-splattered car window in the middle of a dark industrial complex nearly half a century ago. They characterize his statement as a product of retrospective suggestion, a false memory planted by federal agents who showed him vintage photographs and fed him details of a crime he had already consumed on the evening news. While the legal skirmishes over witness credibility intensify in the judge's chambers, the financial forensic analysts achieve a parallel breakthrough that unearths a whole new layer of systemic darkness beneath Raymond Vance's career. By utilizing advanced digital scanning to cross-reference the Ohio safety deposit boxes with old manufacturing property deeds along the regional highway corridors, they discover that Vance had purchased a small, isolated plot of industrial storage land near Gary, Indiana, in the summer of 1981, less than a year after his Toledo safety deposit accounts were activated. The land sat directly adjacent to an old, abandoned rail yard that had been utilized by the automotive shipping networks during the height of the Rust Belt expansion. When a team of federal archaeologists and state police cadaver dog units is quietly deployed to the Gary property, they encounter a landscape of pure, industrial desolation, a field of cracked asphalt, rusted oil drums, and overgrown weeds that had sat undisturbed for over 40 years. Within 6 hours of entering the perimeter, 3 separate highly trained forensic dogs flag a concrete retention pit located beneath the skeletal remains of an old tool shed. The subsequent excavation unearths a deep, subterranean void that smells of decayed oil and stagnant water. Hidden beneath a layer of old railroad ties, investigators discover 2 heavily rusted industrial steel drums secured with chains that match the manufacturing specifications of the River Rouge foundry line. The contents of those drums send a shockwave of absolute, paralyzing horror through the entire multi-state task force. Inside the reinforced steel containers are the skeletal remains of 2 unidentified young women, their bodies preserved in a matrix of industrial grease and heavy-duty utility wrap. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment reveals an identical, chilling signature. Both victims had been executed with a precise, clinical ligature strangulation using the same type of thin nylon cord that had taken the life of Linda Novak in October 1979. One of the skulls still bears a fragment of black electrical tape secured over the jawline, a terrifying, unmistakable calling card of a serial predator who had used the vast, interconnected industrial landscape of the Midwest as his private, invisible cemetery. The discovery completely alters the historical scope of the prosecution. Raymond Vance is no longer just a local cold case suspect facing a single charge of murder in Detroit. He is unmasked as an apex, nomadic shadow predator whose operational longevity was protected by the very industrial infrastructure that built the region. He had weaponized his position as an auto worker, utilizing his routine travel logs and his specialized access to manufacturing shipping centers to move across state lines, hunting in the shadows of the foundries, leaving behind a trail of blood that was swallowed by the economic collapse of the Rust Belt. Back in the small, tightly knit neighborhood of Dearborn, the news of the Indiana discovery breaks like a thunderclap, shattering the remaining illusions of suburban quietude. The residents are paralyzed by a collective sense of profound, existential dread. The realization settles into their chests with a sickening weight. The gentle old man who had sat on his front porch for 47 years, helping them clear their snowy driveways and sharing backyard barbecues, wasn't just hiding the ghost of Linda Novak. He was a walking monument to a generation of missing women, a prolific monster who had successfully used their trust as a shield to protect a lifetime of clinical slaughter. Inside the high-security administrative segregation block of the Wayne County Jail, the psychological armor of Raymond Vance is finally beginning to show signs of terminal structural collapse, even if his facial mask remains frozen in a posture of stoic defiance during his brief legal visits. The human mind, no matter how cold or detached, cannot survive the sudden, simultaneous exposure of all its hidden graves. The jail logs reveal that Vance has completely stopped sleeping, his eyes remaining wide and fixed on the ceiling of his cell through the long, freezing hours of the night. The closed-circuit cameras capture him sitting on the edge of his narrow bunk at 3 a.m., his hands shaking violently as he stares at his own fingernails, his lips moving in a frantic, unyielding mutter that sounds like a map being read in the dark, a rapid, rhythmic recitation of highway markers, factory exits, and the names of towns that have long since been forgotten by the rest of the world. As the calendar pages turn toward the final days of December, the prosecution team files their amended exhibit list with the circuit court, a narrative masterpiece that binds the physical geography of Detroit to the industrial graveyards of Indiana through the absolute certitude of modern science. They have constructed a comprehensive, three-dimensional digital matrix that links the chemical composition of the electrical tape found at the 1979 Dearborn crime scene directly to the adhesive structures recovered from the steel drums in Gary. Every piece of data is locked into a master chronological trap from which there is no escape. The stage is officially set for the commencement of the full criminal trial, a historic, cinematic confrontation where a city's 47-year night of terror will finally meet the unyielding light of absolute justice, and where the memory of Linda Novak will become the lever that pulls down the final wall of a monster's fortress. The heavy, reinforced double doors of the ceremonial courtroom click shut, sealing out the muted, icy roar of the downtown Detroit streets. Inside room 602, the air is thick, stationary, and cold, charged with the immense historical gravity of a moment 47 years in the making. It is the first Monday of January, and the final legal collision of the state of Michigan versus Raymond Vance has officially arrived. Every wooden bench in the expansive public gallery is packed to its absolute physical limits. Observers sit shoulder to shoulder, their breath forming faint plumes of moisture in the poorly heated room. The atmosphere is gripped by a collective, shallow breathing as 12 citizens file into the wooden jury box, their faces solemn, their eyes avoiding the defense table where the fallen Titan sits. Raymond Vance has traded his orange inmate uniform for an impeccably tailored navy blue wool suit, a crisp white shirt, and a conservative silk tie, a calculated, final visual manipulation designed by Eleanor Vance Wells to evoke the image of a respectable, dignified elder statesman of the old blue-collar Detroit. His silver hair is neatly combed, his thin reading glasses perched high on the bridge of his nose as he pretends to study a stack of legal transcripts. To any casual observer walking into the room, he looks like a kindly, retired manufacturing executive preparing to deliver a lecture on industrial history. But across the central aisle, the prosecution team moves with the cold, quiet efficiency of a firing squad. Marcus Sterling stands at the podium, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed directly on the jury box as he prepares to shatter 47 years of absolute security in a single, devastating opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sterling begins, his voice low, resonant, and vibrating with a controlled, professional fury that instantly commands the entire room. 47 years ago, in the freezing autumn of 1979, a shadow fell over the working-class neighborhood of Dearborn. A vibrant, ambitious 21-year-old woman named Linda Novak was torn from the safety of her basement apartment without a single sound echoing to the street. For nearly half a century, the people of this city believed her killer was a phantom, a transient monster who had rolled into town under the cover of a rainstorm, committed an unspeakable act of violence, and dissolved back into the industrial mist of the Rust Belt. They believed this because the technology of that era was blind, and because the economic collapse of our city allowed the case files to gather dust in the basement of an abandoned archive. Sterling pauses, turning slowly to face the defense table, his arm extending as he points a single, steady finger directly at the defendant. But the evidence will demonstrate that the phantom wasn't a traveler from a distant place. He was a neighbor. He was a trusted auto worker. He was the man who sat on his front porch for 47 years, waving at your parents, sharing your barbecues, and clearing your snowy driveways, all while carrying the chilling memory of a clinical execution inside his chest. The defendant, Raymond Vance, utilized his specialized access to the automotive manufacturing infrastructure of the city to target, abduct, and conceal his victim, leaving behind a forensic signature that he believed was invisible. Today, the state of Michigan will reach back through 47 years of silence, rip away that grandfatherly mask, and show you the terrifying truth of the monster who has been hiding in plain sight. For the next 90 minutes, Sterling delivers a masterful, chronological roadmap of the prosecution's case, weaving the complex threads of subsurface digital science and historical industrial records into a tight, suffocating narrative trap. He details how modern next-generation lasers penetrated the degraded adhesive layer of the black electrical tape found at the 1979 crime scene, isolating a pristine latent thumbprint that maps directly to Vance's identity with an astronomical certainty of 1 in 80 billion. He outlines the historical gate logs verified by Walter Briggs, placing Vance at the foundry loading dock in the middle of a mandatory plant shutdown just hours after the abduction. And finally, he drops the ultimate, Chandong revelation into the jury box, detailing the discovery of the industrial steel drums on the Gary, Indiana property, linking the chemical composition of the adhesive materials to a multi-state trail of nomadic slaughter. The jurors listen in absolute, rapt attention, their faces hardening as the clinical calculation of the crime is unspooled before them. When Eleanor Vance Wells stands to deliver the opening presentation for the defense, the contrast in style is immediate and confrontational. She does not look at her client. Instead, she mounts a savage, direct assault on the reliability of human memory and the integrity of modern algorithmic science. She holds up a copy of the original 1979 property clerk's log, shaking it toward the jury box. The government has built you a high-definition digital ghost story, Vance Wells declares, her voice booming through the courtroom speakers. They have taken pieces of fragmented data, 30-year-old memories from compromised witnesses, and speculative computer models, and they have woven them together to destroy the legacy of a man who gave 35 years of his life to honest, blue-collar labor. They talk about fingerprint certainty, but they won't tell you about the basement floods that ravaged the Dearborn evidence vaults in 1981. They won't tell you about the dozens of uncertified hands that handled these boxes during department reorganizations. This is not a triumph of justice. It is a triumph of desperation by a cold case unit under intense public pressure to solve a historic mystery by any means necessary. With the opening arguments concluded, the prosecution wastes no time, immediately calling its first witness to the stand, Eleanor Larson, Linda Novak's surviving cousin, who traveled from her home out of state to face the man who had hollowed out her family's history. The courtroom is gripped by a profound, emotional stillness as the elderly woman is assisted to the witness chair by a county sheriff. Her voice is a fragile, papery whisper that requires the audio technician to adjust the microphone closer to her lips. Under Sterling's gentle guidance, she describes the normal, domestic mundane details of October 12, 1979, the smell of the fresh coffee Linda had brewed, the quiet ticking of the clock in the hallway, and the sudden, terrifying emptiness of the apartment the next morning, the bathroom window sitting open to the freezing rain. "Who did your family look to for answers during those first dark weeks, Mrs. Larson?" Sterling asks, stepping closer to the well. "We look to the community," Eleanor whispers, a single tear cutting through the powder on her wrinkled cheek. "We look to our neighbors. We held prayer vigils on our front lawns. And Raymond Vance was there. He lived just a few blocks away. He stood on our grass, he held a candle, and he looked my weeping Aunt dead in the eye and told her that whoever did this would burn in hell. He ate our food during the memorial services. He helped lift Linda's casket into the hearse because her father was too broken by grief to carry it. He carried her body on his shoulders, all while knowing that his own fingerprint was trapped inside the tape that had bound her wrists." The revelation causes a visible, visceral shudder to run through the jury box. One of the alternate jurors drops his pen, staring across the aisle at the defense table with an expression of unadulterated revulsion. The defense table remains completely frozen, Vance Wells staring down at her legal pad, knowing that no amount of technical forensic skepticism can easily erase the grotesque, human reality of that psychological betrayal. Vance had not just murdered their daughter, he had embedded himself in their grief, utilizing his position as a sympathetic neighbor to monitor their suspicions and ensure his own absolute security across 2 generations of human history. When Vance Wells stands for the cross-examination, she chooses her words with extreme caution, aware that any overt aggression toward the elderly, grieving witness would completely alienate the jury. She focuses entirely on the chaotic timeline of the morning of the disappearance, establishing that multiple volunteers, frantic family members, and low-ranking patrol officers had moved through the small basement apartment before the crime scene was officially locked down by Detective Kowalski. She wants to plant the subtle, early seed that any forensic cross-contamination could have occurred during those initial hours of frantic, uncoordinated panic, and that the fingerprint could have been transferred via a shared utility role at a local neighborhood watch gathering. Eleanor answers with a quiet, dignified clarity, refusing to let her memory be fractured by the lawyer's suggestions. As the first day of testimony draws to a close and the court is formally adjourned, the image of Eleanor Larson sitting in the witness box lingers in the heavy, cold air of room 602 like a permanent monument to an unyielding pursuit of justice. The opening salvo of the trial has set a dark, cinematic tone that renders the defense's technical arguments increasingly hollow. Outside, the media pack consumes the details of the cousin's testimony, broadcasting her words to a national audience that is increasingly transfixed by the ultimate downfall of the Detroit auto worker. Raymond Vance is led back to his transport vehicle under a heavy guard of state troopers, his face still an unreadable mask of stone, but the walls of his multi-decade fortress are beginning to show their first terminal cracks, and the long, slow march toward absolute accountability has officially begun. The second day of testimony opens with a tactical shift by the prosecution, moving from the raw, emotional weight of the victim's family to the cold, undeniable precision of physical evidence. The rain outside has settled into a persistent, dreary mist that hangs over the federal courthouse, mirroring the grim technical analysis unfolding within. Marcus Sterling calls Marcus Reyes to the stand. The retired detective walks with a slight limp, his expression hardened by decades of carryover frustration, his eyes focused entirely on the prosecutor as he takes the oath. Reyes represents the institutional memory of the original investigation, the man who was on the ground in 1979, watching from the inside as the gears of justice were deliberately jammed by the limitations of the era. Under direct examination, Reyes details the immediate procedural anomalies that plagued the first 48 hours of the search. He describes how he was assigned to secure the exterior perimeter of the Novak residence, where he discovered the distinct window modifications. It was pristine, Reyes testifies, his voice carrying a resonant, gravelly authority that commands the jury's attention. The rain hadn't distorted the window frame yet because it was partially sheltered by the roof overhang. It was a high-grade, deep-cut execution, typical of someone who knew exactly how to handle specialized industrial tools. I immediately called for a forensic tech to cast the area and secure the materials. "And what exactly did you recover from that bathroom sink, Detective Reyes?" Sterling asks, stepping closer to the witness box. Reyes nods slowly, his jaw tightening. A single, discarded piece of heavy-duty black electrical tape. It had been torn off with a jagged edge, suggesting the killer had used his own teeth to sever the strip. In 1979, we dusted it, but the primitive methods yielded only a chaotic smear of partial ridges on the backing. We didn't have the technology to look underneath the adhesive. It was classified as unclassifiable by our identification bureau, but I made sure that tape was preserved in a specialized, airtight pouch inside the master file. I knew that tape held the killer's identity, even if we couldn't read it yet. A murmur ripples through the public gallery, prompting the judge to cast a warning glance over the crowd. Sterling transitions to the high-definition display screens, projecting a digital copy of the original 1979 evidence logging sheets that had been tracked from the Dearborn Repository to the State Archive in Lansing. The sheets are filled with handwritten entries detailing vehicular assignments, personnel movements, and field entries. Reyes explains how the chain of custody was maintained with absolute bureaucratic obsession despite the structural decline of the local precinct. "We knew the city was struggling," Reyes states, his eyes shifting briefly to Raymond Vance. "But we didn't let the evidence decay. Every time a file was moved, every time a box was transferred during the department consolidations of the early 80s, it was logged, verified, and locked behind cryptographic seals. We treated that cardboard container like a time capsule. We were saving it for a future that could finally read the language of the skin ridges." Eleanor Vance Wells's cross-examination of Reyes is a masterclass in aggressive, defensive litigation. She attempts to paint the retired detective as an old lawman whose memory has been heavily retrofitted by recent media coverage. She leans heavily on the passage of time, questioning whether Reyes can truly remember the specific environmental conditions of a fluid, fast-moving crime scene from 47 years ago. Isn't it true, Detective Reyes, that the chaotic economic crisis of 1979 created immense logistical difficulties for the entire department? Vance Wells asks, her voice booming through the speakers. Isn't it possible that what you call meticulous preservation was actually a chaotic administrative shuffle where boxes were mixed, labels were misapplied, and items from different crime scenes were accidentally commingled in the basement vaults? Reyes looks directly at the defense attorney, his expression unyielding. Economic crises don't create matching fingerprints under vacuum-sealed adhesive tape, counselor. The box was sealed, the numbers matched, and the tape never left its containment pouch until it entered the state crime lab last year. That's not a shuffle. That's an unbroken chain. The afternoon session transitions into the clinical domain of advanced forensic science. The prosecution calls Dr. Eris Thorne, the molecular geneticist who revolutionized the state's approach to the Vance investigation. The high-definition screens fill with complex genomic charts, mapping out the precise structure of short tandem repeat markers and subsurface skin ridge geometry. Dr. Thorne speaks with the calm, academic certainty of a scholar who deals in absolute mathematical probabilities, explaining how his laboratory extracted the pristine latent print trapped beneath the degraded adhesive layers of the utility tape. In 1979, the technology to analyze a sample hidden beneath an adhesive matrix simply did not exist, Dr. Thorne explains, using a digital pointer to highlight specific ridge characteristics on the screen. The adhesive material had effectively acted as a protective shroud, sealing the skin cells and oils away from oxygen, ambient moisture, and bacterial degradation for 47 years. Using laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy and advanced digital lifting techniques, we were able to penetrate the chemical layers of the glue without disturbing the underlying skin ridge impressions. We mapped over 200 separate minutiae points, bifurcations, ridge endings, and sweat pore distributions. Dr. Thorne points to a complex, point-by-point comparison chart projected on the screen, showing how the crime scene print aligned with the modern biometric profile of Raymond Vance. The level of concordance we observed rules out any possibility of a false positive. The statistical probability of this print belonging to any other individual on the North American continent is approximately 1 in 80 billion. It is a unique biometric signature. The man who handled that tape was the defendant. The defense table is completely silent as the numbers hang in the air. Vance Wells stands for the cross-examination, her tone shifting from theatrical outrage to a meticulous, granular interrogation of laboratory calibration protocols. She spends over an hour questioning Dr. Thorne about the potential for secondary transfer, the scientific concept that an individual's fingerprint can be transferred to an object they never touched through intermediate contact or shared toolboxes. Mr. Vance was a maintenance inspector at a massive industrial facility, Dr. Thorne, Vance Wells argues, leaning over her table. He handled tools, supply rolls, and utility tape that were used by hundreds of other autoworkers throughout the River Rouge complex. Sameness of a print doesn't prove presence at a crime scene. Isn't it scientifically possible that another factory worker borrowed a roll of tape that Mr. Vance had previously handled and carried that tape to the Novak residence, thereby accidentally transferring his latent print to the scene? While secondary transfer is a recognized phenomenon in trace DNA analysis, Dr. Thorne responds calmly. The print we recovered was not a superficial smudge on the surface of the tape. It was an encapsulated latent thumbprint pressed firmly into the inner adhesive backing, a print that required significant physical force to embed within the glue structure itself, consistent with the act of tearing the tape with immense pressure. This wasn't a floating skin cell or a secondary contact smudge. It was an operational, high-pressure execution of force trapped inside the adhesive matrix. It positions his hands directly at the moment of manipulation. As the second day of the trial draws to a close, the psychological weight of the evidence begins to settle heavily over the courtroom. The jurors file out of the box with somber, exhausted expressions, their minds grappling with the intersection of old-world blue-collar geography and modern forensic science. Raymond Vance is led back out to his holding cell, his posture still straight, but his head tilted slightly downward, the physical reality of his 74 years catching up to the psychological armor that has shielded him for nearly half a century. The trial has moved past the realm of speculation, trapping the former factory inspector within an iron circle of his own biometric signatures, leaving the defense with dwindling options as the prosecution prepares to unleash its final, devastating array of digital mapping and human eyewitness testimony. The third morning of the trial brings a palpable shift in the courtroom's atmosphere as the prosecution prepares to merge human testimony with the cold data of digital reconstruction. Outside, the maritime fog off the Detroit River has returned, turning the city's skyline into a series of jagged, charcoal silhouettes against a white sky. Inside, the public gallery is dead silent, the air heavy with the collective realization that the trial is approaching its narrative zenith. Marcus Sterling steps to the microphone and calls Walter Briggs to the stand. The 81-year-old retired factory security guard moves slowly toward the witness box, assisted by a court officer. He wears a neatly pressed blue blazer that hangs slightly loose on his frame, his face lined with the sharp, weathered features of a man who spent his life working outdoor night shifts along the industrial corridors of southeast Michigan. He takes the oath in a clear, rasping voice that carries an old-school, blue-collar directness. For 47 years, Briggs had lived a quiet life, completely disconnected from the digital true crime frenzy, entirely unaware that a single entry in a dusty cardboard gate log held the key to a state's most haunting mystery. Under direct examination, Sterling guides Briggs back to the early morning hours of October 13th, 1979. He describes the fierce winter storm that had shut down most of the metropolitan traffic, turning his isolated security booth near the main gate of the River Rouge maintenance foundry into a lonely outpost surrounded by darkness and rushing water. It was the kind of night where nobody went out unless they absolutely had to, Briggs testifies, leaning close to the microphone. The roads were slick, the visibility was down to near zero because of the fog and the heavy downpour, and the wind was howling through the foundries. And did you observe any vehicles approach your station during that shift, Mr. Briggs? Sterling asks. Only one, Briggs replies, nodding slowly. At exactly 2:15 in the morning, a dark sedan approached the checkpoint heading toward the loading dock, traveling without emergency lights. It struck me as highly unusual given the hazardous conditions and the fact that the plant was under a mandatory retooling shutdown. I stepped out of my booth to log the vehicle plate, but as it drew closer, the driver rolled down the window just a few inches. Did you recognize the driver, Mr. Briggs? Briggs looks across the courtroom, his eyes locking onto Raymond Vance with a steady, unblinking focus. Yes, sir. I did. It was Raymond Vance. He didn't say much. He looked completely disheveled, his clothes soaked through, his face covered in deep scratches that looked like they came from bushes. Or a severe struggle. He told me he had forgotten his personal toolbox inside the foundry basement and needed emergency clearance to recover it. He gave me a hard look, told me to mind my own business, and drove straight back toward the maintenance lockers where the heavy-duty industrial canvas tarps were stored. When he came back out 20 minutes later, his trunk was riding low, heavy, like he was carrying a massive weight. Sterling transitions to the digital projector, displaying a high-resolution scan of the original 1979 gate log sheet. The handwritten text is stark and unambiguous on the screen. 2:15 a.m. Unit 14. R. Vance. Emergency toolbox recovery clearance granted. Why did you make this entry, Mr. Briggs? Because it was unusual, Briggs answers simply. A maintenance inspector showing up alone at a restricted facility in the middle of a catastrophic storm during a mandatory shutdown. It didn't fit routine operations. I kept a log of everything unusual during my shifts. It was a habit I kept for 30 years. Eleanor Vance Wells's cross-examination is immediate and fiercely adversarial. She attempts to capitalize on Briggs's medical records, which her private investigators had unspooled prior to the trial. Mr. Briggs, Vance Wells begins, her voice carrying a sharp, skeptical edge as she paces the floor. You've been treated for early-stage vascular dementia, is that correct? A condition that severely compromises your memory, particularly regarding events from decades ago. I was diagnosed with mild vascular dementia in 2022, counselor. Briggs shoots back, his voice hardening, refusing to be intimidated by the lawyer's aggressive posture. But my memory of my factory days remains razor-sharp. I didn't need a medical chart to see a man's face from 3 feet away when he rolled down his window and gave me a hard look. I knew what Raymond Vance looked like. He was an inspector on my shift for years. I didn't connect his drive to a murder back then because I trusted him just like everyone else did. Vance Wells pivots, attempting to chip away at the chronological validity of the journal entry. But isn't it true that you didn't provide this information to law enforcement until after the federal task force knocked on your door in Wisconsin? For 47 years, you sat on this log while an innocent community suffered, and now you expect this jury to believe your memory of a 5-second interaction through a rain-splattered window. I didn't sit on anything, Briggs replies firmly. I didn't know Linda Novak had been buried in that specific subterranean valve chamber until the FBI showed up at my house last year and told me where her body was found. When they gave me the dates, I remembered that rainy night at the gate. I didn't connect it to a crime back then because Raymond was a quiet guy, an inspector. I never thought, God help me, I never thought he was carrying a body in that low-riding trunk. The afternoon session belongs to the digital forensic mapping experts who deliver the final, crushing blow to the defense's behavioral timeline. The prosecution calls Special Agent Marcus Vance, no relation to the defendant, a leading data analyst with the FBI's Operational Technology Division. Agent Vance utilizes a state-of-the-art interactive three-dimensional digital model of the entire Detroit utility network from 1979, overlaid with the retrofitted satellite telemetry and manufacturing records. The lights in the courtroom are dimmed, and the massive display screens glow with a vibrant, digital recreation of the night Linda vanished. The jury watches as a bright red marker, representing Raymond Vance's identity profile, begins to move through the virtual streets. The data is synchronized with the historical weather logs, showing the exact minute the storm hit the Dearborn neighborhood. The red marker is positioned just yards from Linda Novak's basement apartment window, idling in the dark during the estimated abduction window. As we advance the timeline to 2:15 a.m., Agent Vance explains, using a digital laser pointer to track the red line, the behavioral profile departs the neighborhood. It bypasses the main thoroughfares, navigating through secondary agricultural roads to avoid the municipal traffic patterns that were active at the